Hi everyone. Tonight, we travel deep into the rugged core of the American frontier, where the mountains rise like quiet giants and the wind moves sharply through the trees. The air is cold enough to turn your breath into small clouds. Beneath a thick layer of snow, the land rests in near stillness, almost as if it is pausing. The quiet is interrupted only by the occasional crack of wood as the frost tightens around it. In these severe and unforgiving conditions, men once built their homes, simple yet strong cabins that stood as a symbol of human endurance. But surviving here was never easy. You likely wouldn't survive this. So before you settle in, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy the content. I'd also like to know where you're listening from, so share your location and local time in the comments. Now, lower the lights, and let's begin. The men who explored these wild lands were known as mountain men. They were not soldiers or traditional settlers. Instead, they were hunters, trappers, and explorers. They searched for wealth, but not in the usual way. Gold, fur, and the untouched beauty of the land drew them forward. However, despite their strength and experience, they were not immune to the harsh winters that wrapped around the mountains like a cold, suffocating force. Their story is not only about survival. It is about resourcefulness, persistence, and the determination to build a place in a world that often seemed to resist them. But how did they manage it? How did these tough individuals, equipped with little more than axes and basic tools, create shelter in the wilderness and endure the extreme cold of the Rocky Mountains or the snow-covered peaks of the Appalachians? The answer is deeply connected to the history of the land itself. Building a cabin in the wild was not just about assembling a roof and four walls. It was a direct struggle against nature. Every choice, from selecting the location to choosing materials, and even blocking the wind, could mean the difference between life and death. A poorly placed log could result in the loss of a family, or worse, a lonely and early death. Picture the men moving through the deep wilderness, their faces roughened by wind, their hands sore from continuous chopping. There were no roads and no nearby neighbors, only them, the land, and the cold. Choosing a place to build was often the first major challenge. The ground needed to be level enough for construction, but not so low that it would flood during spring rains. The shelter also had to remain somewhat hidden to avoid unwanted attention, whether from Native American tribes or other trappers who might claim the same territory. Many of these men were not only dealing with nature but also competing with others seeking a place in the wilderness. Once a suitable location was chosen, the real work began. Wood was the primary and often the only reliable resource. The first step in building a cabin was cutting down trees. Tall pines and strong oaks were preferred. However, bringing down these trees was difficult. Without modern equipment, mountain men depended on axes and hand saws, sometimes relying purely on physical effort. Imagine the sound of an axe striking wood, the heavy crash as a tree hits the ground, and the scent of fresh pine filling the air. It was a moment that reflected both progress and struggle. Each tree had to be cut into usable logs. But the real challenge was not just placing the logs, it was fitting them together tightly enough to keep out the cold. Even small gaps could allow freezing winds to enter and endanger lives. To ensure a tight fit, the men used a method known as notching. They carefully shaped the ends of each log so they would lock together securely, almost like interlocking pieces. When done correctly, the structure became both stable and resistant to air leaks. Still, this alone was not enough to handle the mountain winters. The spaces between the logs needed to be sealed. This is where practical knowledge and creativity were essential. Native American tribes had long used materials such as clay and moss to insulate their shelters. Mountain men adopted similar methods and expanded on them. They used mud, moss, animal hair, and even straw to fill the gaps, forming an effective barrier against wind and snow. The smell of damp earth and natural materials filled the air as these spaces were sealed, protecting the cabin from the elements. Inside, the cabin remained basic. A small hearth or fireplace formed the center of the space. It was used for cooking, heating, and sometimes even sleeping nearby for warmth. Constructing a fireplace in the wilderness required care. The chimney had to allow smoke to escape properly without filling the cabin. Without fire, survival in such freezing conditions would not be possible. The steady crackle of burning would become one of the few consistent sounds, offering both warmth and a sense of comfort in an otherwise silent environment. After the shelter was complete, the true challenge of survival continued. Food was limited during winter. Many mountain men depended on hunting and trapping to sustain themselves. You can almost imagine the faint movement of animals in the snow, the quiet snap of a trap, and the patience required as they waited, sometimes for days, to secure enough food. But animals were not the only concern. The cold remained a constant threat. There were no advanced clothing materials, and staying warm required continuous effort. The fire needed to last, or the risk of freezing became real. Despite these conditions, these men did not give up. They understood that survival required constant effort. They were not just building shelters. They were establishing lives and, at times, small communities in an environment that offered little support. Every log placed, every stone set, and every effort made was a step forward. When the cabin was finished, it was more than a structure. It became a place of protection. As the fire burns steadily in the corner and the wind continues outside, you are inside, warm and secure. You have made it through the most difficult part, at least for now. But for the mountain men, survival involved more than building shelter. It required building a life. And within that life, every hardship became a story worth remembering. The wind continues outside, its distant sound moving through small openings in the cabin walls. Inside, the fire burns steadily, though its warmth only partially holds back the cold that slowly settles in. You take a breath, noticing the scent of pine and the natural smell of moss. The cold outside can feel overwhelming, but inside this cabin, the mountain men found temporary safety. Your only companions were the howling wind and the crackling fire. The only noises came from scraping tools, chopping logs, and the soft whisper of snow drifting quietly across the land. The men who built these cabins lived at the edge of the world, isolated in ways most people would never experience. Yet they continued, because in the wilderness, there was no alternative. For these men, the first winter was always the hardest. It was a true test, an initiation into a harsh environment where even a small mistake could lead to death. They could no longer depend on the comforts of civilization. There were no markets for trade, no nearby neighbors to ask for help. They quickly realized that survival depended entirely on their own effort, and their first priority was clear: build shelter. The task was far more complex than simply stacking logs. Building a cabin in the wild required planning and careful thought. It meant choosing the right location, flat, but not overly flat. A suitable spot offered protection from strong winds, access to nearby timber for construction, and a water source available during warmer months. But even if the perfect location was found, severe weather could turn every step into a challenge. One of the most important choices involved selecting which trees to cut. Most mountain men used whatever grew nearby, often pine, cedar, or oak. Pine was especially useful because of its straight, long trunks, ideal for logs. However, pine had a drawback. Its sticky sap, especially in cold weather, could make cutting and shaping the logs more difficult. Still, these men understood that survival was not about comfort. It was about using whatever resources nature provided. They knew their greatest resource was the land itself. Trees, soil, rocks, and animals all served as materials for survival. Everything had to be used efficiently. There were no lumber yards or hardware stores. Every resource came directly from nature. In this environment, creativity and hard work determined success or failure. You could almost hear the sound of axes striking trees, the steady rhythm as logs fell to the ground. Each log became part of a larger structure. No two were identical, each had its own form and character. During construction, every decision mattered. The walls needed to be strong enough to handle snow and wind, yet stable enough to support the roof. The cabin had to be small enough to retain heat but large enough to avoid feeling cramped. It was a careful balance that required both skill and accuracy. Even a small mistake could result in a weak structure or allow freezing air to enter. The first step was building a solid foundation. Time could not be wasted on anything unstable. Large stones or logs were placed carefully to create a level base, preventing the cabin from sinking into the ground over time. You could imagine the effort involved, the men lifting and positioning heavy materials with precision. Every movement had purpose. Once the foundation was complete, work on the walls began. Logs were cut and notched to fit together securely. This process took time and required accuracy, as no materials could be wasted. If the notches were too shallow, gaps would allow cold air and snow inside. If too deep, the logs would weaken. Each notch had to be shaped carefully, often using only simple tools like an axe or a handsaw. There was a steady, almost calm rhythm in their work. Each movement was controlled and focused. In a world where survival was the main goal, rushing was not an option. Every action needed careful attention. Filling the gaps between the logs, known as chinking, was just as important. Without it, cold air would enter and turn the cabin into an icebox. The men used whatever materials were available: clay, moss, mud, even animal hair. Imagine pressing cold, damp clay into the gaps, the smell of wet earth and moss in the air. They worked continuously, sealing every opening to ensure no drafts could pass through. Despite the effort, there was satisfaction in seeing the cabin gradually take shape. When the cabin was finished, it represented more than shelter. It became protection against the wilderness, a sign of strength, persistence, and resourcefulness. Inside the structure, they would face the coming winter, dealing with cold and isolation, but knowing they had built something to keep them safe. The first winter remained their greatest challenge. But with a strong cabin, survival became possible, even in the harshest conditions. The fire burns low now, while the wind continues outside. You close your eyes and imagine being inside one of those cabins, the exhaustion of the day behind you, the warmth of the fire spreading through your body. The wilderness is quiet. You have made it through another night. The fire crackles gently, filling the cabin with the familiar scent of burning wood. Outside, the storm continues without pause. Yet inside there is safety. The wind roars and snow falls heavily, but within these wooden walls, there is warmth. The mountain men understood the difficulty of long winters, where the cold could freeze your breath and turn simple tasks into struggles. But they learned to survive in this frozen world. The first challenge was building a home. Once that was complete, the next step was keeping it warm. Building a cabin alone was not enough for survival. This was a reality they quickly accepted. The next major test was heating the shelter. In regions like the Rocky Mountains or the Appalachians, winter was not just uncomfortable, it was dangerous. Without proper heat, survival was unlikely. Fire became essential, and they knew a well-built fireplace could determine life or death. The challenge was not only starting a fire but maintaining it, ensuring it lasted through long nights and freezing days. A good fire required fuel, and that meant constant work. Even after completing the cabin, they spent hours collecting wood, cutting it into usable pieces, and carrying it back. Each day demanded effort and endurance. You could almost hear the steady strikes of axes against wood, while the scent of pine and oak filled the air. Each piece of firewood was valuable. It wasn't only about warmth. It marked the boundary between survival and the harsh cold outside. But firewood was only one part of the situation. Even if there was enough wood for the entire winter, keeping the cabin warm was another challenge altogether. Most mountain cabins had a small stone or clay fireplace that served as both the cooking area and the source of heat. However, there was a limitation. A small fire could warm the space directly around it, but it couldn't heat the whole cabin. These fireplaces were built to hold heat, but they had their limits. The men often had to keep the fire going throughout the day, adding fresh logs whenever it began to fade. It was an ongoing effort, and at night they would shut the doors and stay close to the warmth, making sure the fire didn't go out while they slept. As you sit in front of the crackling fire, you can almost feel the heat on your skin. The warmth is comforting, but it doesn't last long. The fire isn't a luxury, it's essential for survival. The mountain men had to manage it carefully, knowing that a single mistake could cause the cabin to freeze overnight. If the fire went out, restarting it would be extremely difficult. The cold, damp air made it nearly impossible to relight. When the fire finally burned steadily, the men could rest, but only briefly. They had to stay alert, checking it from time to time through the night to make sure it stayed alive. As you lie down, the soft crackling of the fire becomes a kind of lullaby, reminding you how fragile your situation really is. The wind may be strong outside, but inside you feel protected, surrounded by warmth and temporary safety. Still, the men understood that heat alone was not enough. They had to be ready for every challenge the wilderness could present. Building a shelter was just the beginning. After that, survival became the main goal. Food quickly became a serious concern. In the harsh wilderness, supplies were not easily available, and the mountain men couldn't depend on farming or simple gathering. They had to develop strong skills in hunting and trapping. Every day required patience and precision. The trees and animals around them were not just scenery. They were necessary resources and had to be used wisely. Hunting was more than a way to find food. It was a careful balance between humans and nature. The mountain men needed to read signs in the environment, understand animal behavior, follow tracks in the snow, and choose the right moment to act. Every hunt had to be planned. Mistakes were costly. A missed shot or a wrong path could lead to hunger. The men used everything available to them, from the meat of a deer to the fur of a beaver, and even berries and roots found during warmer months. The sounds of the forest were both reassuring and threatening, the wind moving through the trees, the distant call of a coyote, and the crunch of snow underfoot. These sounds showed that life continued around them. Even as the mountain men struggled to build their existence in this cold and demanding land, the wilderness remained both helpful and dangerous, offering resources but also constant risk. The animals they hunted were not the only ones in these lands. Bears, wolves, and mountain lions were ongoing threats. Constant awareness was necessary, even when resting inside the cabin. The wild was always close. Still, the men were skilled and made use of everything around them. They didn't rely only on hunting, they also trapped. They set detailed trap lines in the snow, using snares and deadfalls to catch smaller animals. Once the traps were placed, they waited. Patience was critical. You could hear the quiet movement of the wind and the light crunch of snow under your boots as you checked the traps. Sometimes, after hours, a trap would be triggered. Other times, there would be nothing. Even so, the mountain men understood that persistence mattered. They continued their efforts day after day, always working toward their next meal and preparing for the coming winter. The routine never stopped. The men were always active, always preparing for what came next. Yet in quieter moments, sitting near the fire with food in hand, they found brief rest. They had built their shelter. They had survived the long winter. They had endured. Life in the wilderness was difficult, but it was their own, lived on their terms. As the fire burns lower, you begin to fall asleep. The warmth and the knowledge that you made it through another day help you rest. Tomorrow will bring more work, but for now, you are safe. For now, the wilderness is calm. Morning light enters softly through the cabin window. You stretch as the remaining warmth eases your body. Outside, the snow is deep, and the world is quiet except for the occasional wind. There is no need to rush. Survival depends on patience. The cabin, strong against the landscape, feels like a fortress. But the truth remains clear. The struggle never truly ends. Nature is always present, waiting for a mistake that could turn safety into danger. You've made it through the night, and now the focus returns to maintaining warmth. Firewood is stacked near the door, each piece carefully cut and split. The wind outside signals another storm, and the snowfall may grow heavier. Still, inside the cabin, there is a sense of control. The walls, built through effort, stand firm. You realize that you are not just surviving, you are managing to thrive where many would not. As you prepare your tools, your attention shifts to the next task, sealing the gaps between the logs. This simple job is extremely important. The men who first built these cabins understood that even a small opening could let in cold air, turning a warm shelter into a freezing space. These gaps were not minor flaws, they were serious weaknesses. They had to be sealed completely. The wind never stopped, and the cold entered through even the smallest crack. The early settlers relied on resourcefulness. They used whatever materials were available. As they worked, they found that nature already provided what they needed: clay, moss, mud, and even animal hair. Everything had a purpose in sealing the spaces. The process required care and attention. First, the logs were stacked. Then, the material was carefully pressed into the gaps, working it deep into the crevices to seal them completely. Imagine the cool, damp feeling of pressing mud into a narrow space, the earthy scent spreading through the air as the chinking formed. It was a straightforward task, but one that demanded patience and steady skill. No matter how tightly the logs were fitted, without proper sealing materials, the cold would find its way inside, putting your survival at risk. The chinking, though essential, was only the first step. You understood that the strength of your shelter would be tested again and again. Nature could show mercy, but more often, it was harsh. Snow would build up, sometimes blocking the entrance entirely. The wind would roar and the cabin would tremble, creaking under the pressure of the storm. You had to be ready for these conditions, just as the mountain men once were. They knew that survival here depended on maintaining their homes with careful and constant attention. Each morning, after the fire was revived, the men would check every part of their shelter. They knew winter was not just a time of year, it was a test. Snow could bury a cabin, ice could crack the logs, and the continuous force of cold could weaken the entire structure. But the men did not remain idle or leave things to chance. They kept working, always repairing and reinforcing their shelter. And that effort made a difference. Outside, the wind grew sharper and the storm more severe. But inside, the cabin stayed a place of safety. You realized it was not only the fire that provided warmth. It was the effort, the discipline of maintaining the space that truly protected you. Still, despite all the work, the sense of isolation became noticeable. It was a quiet loneliness that settled deep within. Even though you were surrounded by what you had built, the silence of the wilderness felt overwhelming. The solitude was not only physical, though the distance from others was clear, but emotional as well. In the wilderness, mountain men often lived alone for months. They rarely saw others, and when they did, it was brief, a passing meeting with another trapper or a distant neighbor. Yet they accepted this isolation as part of survival. Being far from civilization also meant a certain kind of freedom. They were not controlled by the rules of the outside world, only by the land itself. It was not easy and it was not always comfortable, but it was real. For many, this was the highest form of independence. Living off the land, creating a life directly from nature. Every log cut, every trap placed, every gap filled with mud and moss showed their self-reliance. They were not simply surviving, they were building something from nothing, leaving their mark on a world that often seemed unforgiving. As you sit and look through the cabin's small window, you begin to understand that you are also part of this environment. You have faced the cold. You have built shelter against the storm. You have endured nature's force and remained steady. In a sense, you are connected to those who came before, the mountain men who faced the same land, confronting its challenges day after day to secure their place in the wilderness. The storm outside may still continue, but inside your cabin, there is warmth. The fire burns quietly, its light moving across the walls, while snow keeps falling beyond. Yet here, in this space, you are not only surviving. You are part of a lasting tradition of resilience and endurance. The wind echoes like a distant, mournful sound outside, its cold presence searching for any weakness in the cabin walls. But inside, you are secure, surrounded by the steady warmth of the fire. The flames flicker against the walls, the only source of light in the dark room, while the heat reminds you of the harsh world beyond. Within these log walls, you have created a life that stands firm against the elements. Still, as the snowfall continues, another reality becomes clear. Survival does not depend only on warmth, it also depends on preparation. The mountain men, separated from the outside world, lived in a constant cycle of self-reliance. There were no stores to depend on, no farmers to trade with. If you needed food, you had to provide it yourself. The severity of the wilderness meant your supplies had to last, which required learning the skill of preservation. Whether drying meat or storing root vegetables, every meal required planning. The real challenge came during the long months when fresh food was no longer available. So how did they manage it? The work began well before winter arrived. In autumn, the men gathered everything they could: wild game, fresh vegetables, and fruits. They had to be resourceful, using whatever the land offered. Rivers were filled with fish, and forests were rich with animals like deer, rabbits, and squirrels. Hunting and trapping were not just ways to collect food, they also gave a sense of control in an unpredictable environment. Animals followed their own instincts, not human needs. Once the animals were caught, the next stage began. Preservation was essential. Drying, smoking, and salting were the most reliable methods. Smoking meat required skill, and the mountain men understood it well. The smell of burning wood and the rich scent of meat curing in smoke would fill the air around the cabin. You could almost sense the flavor developing as the process continued. The meat would be hung in a protected area, often using the cool, dry mountain air to assist. Over time, it would dry slowly, becoming a durable and portable food supply. However, survival was not only about meat. The mountain men also preserved fruits and vegetables. Root crops like potatoes and carrots were buried in cool, dry soil to keep them usable through winter. Herbs were dried and stored for flavor, while berries were carefully preserved, often in containers, to be used when fresh food was no longer available. You can almost imagine the quiet sound of harvesting, the soft crack of dried herbs being crushed, ready to enhance a warm meal. But when winter arrived and snow covered everything, new challenges appeared. Game became harder to find, and supplies began to run low. Even then, the men were not completely alone in their struggle. The land itself acted as both support and obstacle. They relied on their knowledge, their tools, and their ability to understand natural signs. During winter, when hunting became difficult, trapping became even more important. The mountain men set detailed trap lines across the forest, aiming for steady results. These traps often caught smaller animals like rabbits and squirrels, and sometimes larger ones such as beavers or wild boar. The scent of wood, cold metal, and freshly prepared traps would mix with the crisp mountain air as they were placed carefully. You can picture the precision required, choosing the right locations, considering the weather, and always staying ready for anything unexpected. But even with the traps in place, there was still the question of how to store the food once it was caught. The solution was usually straightforward: keep it cold. In the mountains, the ground remained frozen for much of the year, and this natural refrigeration became an essential part of daily life. Carcasses were dragged to a hidden location, covered in snow to preserve them, and later retrieved once the cold air had kept them fresh enough for use. It wasn't only about food. Survival in the wilderness required mastery of many skills. The cabin, although strong, could not sustain itself. There were always repairs to handle, loose shingles to secure, gaps in the walls to seal, and firewood to cut. Each day demanded continuous effort to maintain the life they had created. Over time, the men became more in tune with the patterns of the land. They learned the right moments to hunt, when to set traps, and even how to anticipate shifts in the weather. As the seasons changed, they adapted their methods, becoming increasingly resourceful. All of this depended on one key factor: preparation. The men who built their cabins understood that without planning ahead, survival was unlikely. Every task and every step had to be carefully considered. Each piece of wood, every log, every trap set, and every root vegetable gathered had to work together to endure the long, dangerous winter. As the storm outside continues to rage, you are reminded of the daily struggles of the mountain men. With a fire warming your body, the preserved food hanging above, and the logs firmly supporting the roof, you have built a life here, one that, for now, withstands the harsh forces of nature. The isolation, the cold, and the storms all reinforce one truth: survival is not just about strength. It is about resilience, resourcefulness, and the ability to adjust to the environment around you. The cabin that shelters you is more than a structure. It represents endurance, a clear sign of your ability to face whatever the wilderness brings. As the fire crackles softly, you close your eyes briefly, feeling its warmth against your skin. For a moment, there is a sense of calm. Tomorrow will bring more work, but tonight, you are safe. The storm outside continues its relentless force. Yet inside the cabin, a deep sense of stillness takes hold. The fire, now burning low in the hearth, casts a soft amber glow across the walls, flickering gently in the quiet night. The sound of the fire fills the space, making it easy, for a moment, to forget the harsh world beyond the door. But as the wind roars and snow continues to build, you understand that survival here is never guaranteed. It is the steady work, the daily routines, and the readiness to adapt that keep you alive in this unforgiving environment. Once the cabin was completed and the fire remained lit, the next phase of survival truly began. The long mountain winters were not only about staying warm, they were about staying fed. Food was not easily available in the frozen landscape outside. The mountain men who settled in this rugged region did not have the benefit of abundant crops or simple hunting conditions. Instead, they relied on knowledge, traps, and strategic hunting methods. Each day, gathering food became increasingly important. The men had learned long ago that survival required constant awareness, whether scouting for animals, setting traps, or fishing in frozen rivers. Their success depended on using every available resource, from wildlife to the natural surroundings. Hunting was the most direct way to obtain food, and the mountain men needed to be highly skilled at it. However, hunting was not simply about carrying a rifle. It required patience, planning, and precision. The men studied animal behavior, recognized movement patterns, understood weather conditions, and used the terrain to their advantage. Although the mountains were rich with wildlife, they did not easily give up their resources. A missed shot, a wrong path, or poor timing could leave a hunter without food. There were no guarantees. At times, the mountain men went days without a successful hunt, their hunger growing, their expectations challenged by the harsh reality of the wilderness. They came to accept that hunger was as much a part of survival as warmth and shelter. Still, with every failed attempt, they moved closer to success. Each outing taught them more about the land and the animals that lived within it. Hunting, however, was not the only way to gather food. Trapping became equally important, sometimes even more reliable. Traps were placed in carefully chosen locations, often set during the early hours before daylight reached the forest. The quiet crunch of snow underfoot, the subtle movement of air, and the sharp cold against the skin all contributed to a single goal: capturing game. These traps, whether snares, deadfalls, or pit traps, were designed to catch animals efficiently with minimal effort. While less dramatic than hunting, trapping was effective. It allowed the men to secure food while focusing on other responsibilities, such as collecting firewood or repairing the cabin. Checking a trap brought a moment of quiet anticipation, a brief pause as they waited to see whether their effort had succeeded. The mountain men understood that their survival depended on these small, consistent actions. When a trap worked, it provided not only food but also relief, a short-lived victory in the ongoing effort to survive. The quiet satisfaction of pulling a rabbit from a snare or finding a beaver in a trap was significant. It was not just about the food, it was confirmation that their methods were effective, that the balance of nature still favored them. However, success did not come every day. There were times when the wilderness seemed to resist them. Snowstorms could bury traps, and animals could become scarce, staying just out of reach. Isolation remained another ongoing challenge. On rare occasions when mountain men encountered others, the meetings were brief, two individuals crossing paths, exchanging a simple nod before continuing in different directions. They shared a connection, yet remained separated by their solitary lives. Despite these challenges, they were not merely surviving, they were, in their own way, thriving. The wilderness, though harsh, also provided a sense of freedom. With each successful hunt and every piece of food preserved, they were building more than survival. They were creating a life shaped by nature's demands and strengthened through adaptation. Food was not the only concern. The continuous effort to maintain the cabin was just as important. The structure they had built was not just a place to stay, it was a necessity. It was a structure built to endure shifting seasons, heavy snowfall, and constant, forceful winds. The logs required frequent inspection. Any openings needed to be sealed, and the roof had to be checked carefully for leaks. As the firelight flickers gently, you begin to picture the lives of those men. Every day was a confrontation with nature, a true test of their determination and resourcefulness. They lived without modern comforts, yet they managed to persist. Every task they performed, whether chopping wood, setting traps, or preparing food, was a conscious effort to survive in a demanding environment. Each successful hunt, every day they managed to sustain themselves, became a small but meaningful victory in their ongoing struggle to live. The mountains were strikingly beautiful, yet equally unforgiving. Weather conditions could shift without warning. Snowstorms might confine you indoors for days, and wildlife could become scarce. Despite these obstacles, the mountain men did more than simply survive. They adapted, learning the patterns of the land and discovering ways to make life possible. The log cabin they constructed was not merely a shelter, it stood as proof of their persistence and creativity. As the wind howls outside once again, you sense a connection to those who once built their lives in this wilderness. The same cold, the same isolation, and the same struggle for survival echo in the quiet moments beside the fire. In that stillness, you realize that you too have made it through another day, another challenge. The mountain men understood the value of resilience. They knew survival was not based only on physical strength. It required adaptation, wise use of resources, and the refusal to give up. As the storm continues outside, you are reminded of that enduring spirit. The cold presses against the cabin walls, but inside, warmth surrounds you. The cabin is now quiet, interrupted only by the occasional crackle of the fire and the steady sound of the wind outside. The storm moves relentlessly across the wilderness, yet the warmth of the hearth keeps the cold at bay. You find yourself admiring the resilience of the men who once lived here. They understood that survival depended not just on strength, but on their ability to adjust, to use every available resource, and to remain alert in the face of constant challenges. As the fire flickers, you are reminded that survival in the wild is not just about building a shelter, but about maintaining it against harsh conditions. The mountain men were not only builders, they acted as engineers, constantly repairing, strengthening, and improving their homes to withstand nature's force. Every log, every nail, every strike of the axe contributed to ensuring their cabin could endure the harshest winters. The roof, in particular, was one of the weakest points of the structure. Snow and ice would accumulate over time, adding weight that could collapse a poorly constructed shelter. The men understood the need to monitor the roof closely, especially after heavy snowfall. A carefully built roof with strong beams and no weak spots could protect them from falling snow and ice. They would often climb up to inspect it, clearing snow when necessary to prevent dangerous buildup. Imagine the sharp cold of the mountain air, the sound of snow crunching beneath your boots as you climb onto the roof to check that everything remains secure. You understand that each piece of wood is essential, a barrier separating you from the harsh conditions outside. The mountain men also recognized that the foundation of the cabin was just as important as the walls and roof. Without a solid base, the entire structure could shift, sink, or weaken over time. They used large stones or logs to create a strong foundation that could withstand the freeze-thaw cycles of the seasons. The steady sounds of cutting, hammering, and placing materials must have been constant, forming a rhythm that marked the passing of time as they worked tirelessly to keep their home stable. Beyond the physical demands, there was another challenge: the mental strain of isolation. Living in the wilderness tested not only the body but also the mind. The solitude could become overwhelming. Long periods without human contact, combined with the constant struggle against the elements, created a deep sense of isolation. At times, the silence felt heavy, and loneliness could be difficult to endure. Yet the men found ways to cope, extending their resourcefulness beyond physical survival. Many kept journals, documenting daily events, animals observed, weather patterns, and personal thoughts. Writing became a way to stay mentally engaged, a method of maintaining connection beyond the cabin walls. Some found comfort in their memories, holding on to stories of the lives they once lived in towns or cities. Others found peace in the environment itself, the rugged mountains, the distant sound of flowing water, or the quiet stillness of a winter forest. These elements became part of their daily rhythm. In the absence of human interaction, the land itself became a companion, and nature's presence served as a constant, quiet reminder of the life they had chosen. The resilience of the mountain men was not only about surviving winter, it was about learning to live in a place many would consider uninhabitable. Their cabins were small yet strong, reflecting the qualities of the men who built them: steady, determined, and unyielding. These cabins formed the center of their existence. Within them, meals were prepared, fires were maintained, and stories were shared, even if only with the surrounding wilderness. As the night deepens and the fire burns lower, you drift into a calm, reflective state. You feel the weight of the mountains, the cold pressing against the walls, and the constant reminder of survival's demands. Yet in this moment, inside the cabin, there is a sense of peace. The work is never truly finished, but for tonight, you have made it through. Tomorrow the wind will return, the snow will fall again, and the work will continue. But for now, you are safe, surrounded by warmth and the quiet satisfaction of having endured another day in this unforgiving environment. The mountains, with their harsh beauty, will always remain, a reminder of the challenges faced and the strength required to overcome them. As the fire fades and the wind continues outside, you feel a deep connection to those who came before you, the mountain men who built this shelter and faced the same hardships. Like them, you have found a way to endure. For now, the storm continues outside, but inside, you are protected. Inside, there is warmth, and tomorrow, you will continue to survive. Beyond the cabin, the world is a blur of white, snow swirling through the air. The wind moves across the land with a force that feels alive. The storm has lasted for hours and will likely continue through the night. Yet within the strong walls of your cabin, it becomes distant, only a reminder of the immense power of the wilderness surrounding you. Here, in the steady warmth of the fire's glow, you have found shelter. But you also understand that the work never truly stops. The wilderness does not care that you are tired. It does not care if the storm has been raging for days. To survive, you must continue moving forward. One of the greatest challenges the mountain men faced was isolation. They built their cabins far from settlements, in places where few people dared to go. These locations, while offering the protection and solitude they needed, also kept them in constant separation from others. There were no neighbors to call for help. There were no familiar faces to share stories with over a warm meal. The only company the mountain men had was the wilderness itself. And while it could offer beauty and peace, the wilderness was also harsh and unforgiving. In this isolation, the mountain men developed a strong sense of self-reliance. Their survival depended entirely on their ability to repair, build, and manage with whatever resources they had available. When the cabin required repairs, they could not call for assistance. If a log in the wall became loose, or the roof needed fixing, it was their responsibility to handle it. Tools had to remain sharp, and every part of the cabin needed attention. Each task, whether cutting trees or preparing food, was done with the clear understanding that no one else was coming to help. When the first snowfall arrived, it served as a reminder that the months ahead would be long and demanding. The mountain men knew they had to prepare for difficult conditions. Hunting would become more challenging as the weather worsened, and animals became harder to find. The winter would test them in ways they had not yet experienced. But that first snowfall was not only a warning, it was also a signal to take action. The work of gathering, preparing, and preserving supplies had to be completed before the weather made it impossible to leave the safety of the cabin. By the time the snow began to fall heavily, the men had already collected most of what they needed. Furs, meat, dried herbs, and vegetables were stored carefully inside the cabin, each item arranged to last through the winter months. Meat was hung from the rafters, salted and smoked for preservation. Root vegetables were buried deep in the ground to keep them fresh. The men understood that in the wilderness, nothing could be left to chance. Without proper planning, survival was not possible. The cabin itself, though simple, became a symbol of the mountain man's ability to endure nature. It was basic but effective. The walls, built from hand-hewn logs, were strong enough to block the winter winds. The roof, though not as refined as those in cities, was designed to carry the weight of heavy snow. At the center of it all was the hearth, the heart of the cabin, providing warmth, light, and a place to cook food. The fire was essential to life inside the cabin. Without it, survival would not have been possible. Yet even as storms continued outside, the men remained aware of how fragile their situation was. The cabin might stand firm for now, but constant attention was necessary. Snow could collapse the roof, and ice could damage the foundation if not managed properly. Even with careful preparation, the mountain men knew the wilderness was never fully predictable. It could provide and it could take away. The fire crackles in the hearth, and you find yourself absorbed in the warmth of the cabin. You think about the men who lived here before you, their lives shaped by the same land, their struggles reflected in the challenges you now face. They learned to observe the wilderness, to understand its patterns and its changes. They knew when to prepare, when to work, and when to rest. And as the storm continues outside, you realize that you have also become part of that rhythm. The wilderness is no longer something you resist. It is something you cooperate with, adapt to, and respect. Outside, the snow continues to gather, and the wind presses against the cabin walls. But inside, there is calm. There is warmth. And although the night is long and the storm is strong, you know you are secure. The mountain men were never completely safe. They understood that each day could bring new challenges and obstacles. But they continued, shaping their lives in the wilderness, proving that survival was not only about staying alive. It was about growing stronger, adapting, and enduring. Tomorrow, when the storm passes, there will be more work. The traps must be checked, firewood must be restocked, and the cabin must be inspected. But for now, you rest. You have made it through the hardest part, and for tonight, that is enough. The cabin, though modest, is a stronghold, a place of protection from the storm. Inside you are safe. You are warm. And you are connected to the history of those who came before you, the mountain men who built these cabins and struggled to survive in this wild and unforgiving land. The storm outside continues, but inside your cabin there is a steady sense of warmth. The fire has been fed and burns steadily in the hearth, casting soft light across the room. The wind may strike against the walls and snow may gather at the door, but within these walls, you are protected. The isolation that once felt overwhelming now feels like a form of security. You have adjusted to the rhythm of this life, accepting the solitude, the quiet, and the constant work that comes with living in the wilderness. As the fire slowly fades, you take time to reflect on the lives of the mountain men who once lived here. Their existence required constant adjustment and resilience. Every day brought challenges, harsh weather, limited resources, and isolation, yet they endured. Their strength was not only physical. It came from their determination to succeed in a place many would consider unlivable. They understood that survival was not just about enduring conditions. It was about making the wilderness work in their favor. The construction of their cabins played an important role in this effort. These were not just shelters. They were essential structures, carefully built to withstand the forces of nature. The men did not simply build cabins for protection. They built homes that allowed them to live, work, and continue in an environment that offered very little in return. The cabins were small but solid, made from logs precisely fitted together. Each piece was placed to keep warmth inside and the cold outside. The fire in the hearth was not only for comfort. It was central to their survival, providing heat, a way to cook food, and protection against the harsh winters. Even with these shelters, the mountain men understood that survival required more than a cabin. They had to be ready for every situation. Hunting, trapping, preserving food, and maintaining their homes were part of daily life. The wilderness did not respond to their struggles. It did not care if they were tired, cold, or hungry. It simply existed. And within it, the mountain men had to survive by using everything the land provided. Food was always a major concern. With no stores or markets available, the mountain men depended entirely on their hunting and trapping skills to provide what they needed to eat. They needed to be sharp observers of the land, learning where to find game, how to follow its tracks, and when the right time to hunt would be. Hunting was not simply a method of getting food. It was a careful interaction with nature, a measure of patience, accuracy, and ability. The animals did not surrender easily, and the men had to show they were capable of earning the reward. Trapping was another key skill. The men placed detailed trap lines across the forests, using snares, deadfalls, and other devices to capture smaller animals such as rabbits and squirrels, as well as larger ones like beavers. Each trap had to be set precisely in the correct location to be effective. If it was too high, too low, or even slightly misplaced, the animal would escape. This work demanded steady focus and awareness. Although trapping lacked the excitement of hunting with a rifle, it proved highly reliable. It allowed the men to continue other tasks while still securing food in their absence. Food preservation was equally critical as gathering it. The mountain men had to ensure they had enough supplies to last through long winters when hunting and trapping became far less productive. Drying meat, smoking fish, and storing root vegetables were all essential practices for survival. Every day, the men worked to prepare, preserve, and store food for the months ahead. This process was neither fast nor simple. It required time and experience. Meat would be salted, smoked, or dried, then carefully stored to prevent spoilage. The scent of smoked meat often lingered in the cabin, serving as a constant reminder of the effort invested in preparing for winter. Despite all their preparation, the mountain men understood that no amount of food or shelter could fully guarantee survival. Nature remained unpredictable. Weather conditions could shift without warning. A sudden snowstorm might confine a man to his cabin for days, while a dangerous predator could appear at the worst possible moment. They recognized how fragile their lives were and knew that each day in the wilderness was a challenge, not only against the environment but also against their own limits. The first winter was always the most difficult. It tested every skill they possessed and challenged their determination. Cold would spread through every part of the cabin, making even simple tasks feel overwhelming. The fire in the hearth required constant care. Wood had to be cut and gathered regularly. If the fire went out, restarting it could mean risking frostbite or worse. Every meal had to be measured carefully, each portion valuable. The men also had to endure long periods of isolation, with only the land around them for company. Their connection to the outside world came only when they visited nearby trading posts or briefly encountered other trappers. These meetings were short, often limited to a few exchanged words and supplies before they parted ways again. Living in such isolation was not easy. The mountain men had no option but to adjust. They developed a strong connection with the land, learning its patterns, risks, and benefits. Time could not be wasted. Every day was focused on survival, ensuring their cabin remained strong, their food supply lasted, and they were ready for whatever challenges the wilderness presented. The fire crackles in the hearth, spreading warmth throughout the cabin. For a moment, there is a sense of comfort in that same resilience. The mountain men who lived before understood how to use what they had, how to survive in difficult conditions, and how to draw strength from simple things. A solid cabin, a well-preserved meal, a steady fire against the cold. Their legacy exists not only in the logs of their cabins but in the spirit of endurance they left behind, a spirit that continues throughout the wilderness. Outside, the storm continues. Its freezing force turns the land into a stretch of white and gray. Strong winds move through the trees, pressing against the walls of the cabin. Inside, however, the fire provides warmth. Its light flickers across the walls. The isolation feels both calm and unsettling, a silence that surrounds everything. You are alone in this vast wilderness, yet not entirely alone. The cabin, the fire, and the land hold a presence, a reminder of those who once lived here and survived through their own resourcefulness and strength. The mountain men who built these cabins did more than create shelter from the cold. They built homes that reflected their ability to endure. These cabins were places of safety, strongholds in a harsh environment. But the effort did not end once construction was complete. It marked the beginning of an ongoing struggle against the elements. Building the cabin was only the first step. The real challenge was maintaining it, keeping it stable, usable, and warm through the severe months ahead. Each winter brought new difficulties, and survival depended on their ability to repair and strengthen their homes against incoming storms. The roof was one of the weakest parts of the cabin. Snow would gather on it, and if it lacked strength, the weight could cause it to collapse. The men had to regularly maintain their roofs, especially during heavy snowfall. A roof that was too flat would allow snow to accumulate dangerously. They often climbed up to clear it away, a task that was both necessary and risky. The freezing wind would strike their skin, and the icy surface made balance difficult. Still, it had to be done because without a secure roof, everything would be lost. Beyond the roof, the walls also needed constant care. The logs forming the cabin had to be checked frequently. Cold temperatures could cause them to shrink or shift, creating gaps where wind could enter. The men knew that once the wind got inside, it would gradually weaken them. The cabin was not just a sleeping place, it was the center of their existence. The fire provided warmth, but if air slipped through the cracks, that warmth would quickly disappear. To prevent this, they spent hours sealing openings with moss, clay, or animal hair to block the cold. It was not impressive work, but it was necessary. The fire itself remained a constant priority. It was the core of the cabin, the source of survival. Without it, the cold would take over. The men prepared by cutting and storing wood nearby so fuel was always available. Each day, they maintained the fire, ensuring it stayed strong and steady. It was a simple responsibility, yet one that demanded attention at all times. If the fire went out, there was no certainty it could be restarted without danger. The fire was not just warmth, it was life itself. The smell of burning wood, the sound of crackling flames, and the flickering light all became a steady presence in their lives, a reminder that as long as the fire stayed lit, they still had a chance. Outside, the storm continues to rage. But inside, the cabin remains calm. The work of the mountain men is visible in the stillness of the space. Every log, each sealed gap, and every piece of wood carefully cut and stacked. The fire burns low, its warmth still spreading through the room. The men who once lived here did not build only to survive. They built with intent, understanding that survival was not just about strength. It was about adapting, using available resources, and finding solutions in the face of constant challenges. The mountain men understood that life in the wilderness required balance. It was not only about enduring storms. It was about preparing for them, adjusting to seasonal changes, and consistently maintaining the life they had created. They lived in a world where every decision carried weight. A single error could cost everything. Yet in quiet moments, when the wind roared outside and the fire burned gently in the hearth, they found a sense of calm. The cabin was their home, and despite everything the wilderness brought against them, it served as their fortress. Despite the hardships, the mountain men also formed a deep connection with the land around them. They were not just surviving. They were living alongside it, learning its patterns and understanding its rhythms. They knew when to hunt, when to gather, and when to rest. The seasons guided them, and over time, they became part of the landscape, a small but lasting presence in a vast and unforgiving world. As the fire continues to burn low, you can sense that same resilience. The mountain men built their homes from the earth, from trees, and through their own effort and labor. In that process, they found a form of peace, a quiet satisfaction in mastering the skills of survival. Their legacy, written into the walls of these cabins, reflects endurance, strength, and a firm commitment to living in harmony with the wild. Tonight, as you sit by the fire, you are not simply inside a cabin. You are inside a symbol of survival, resilience, and the enduring spirit of the mountain men who once called this place home. And as the storm continues outside, you understand that for now, you are safe. The storm beyond the walls feels endless, its force unrelenting, with wind and snow striking against the cabin. Yet inside, the crackling fire offers warmth that contrasts with the harsh conditions outside. As the cold presses in, you feel a deep sense of appreciation for the structure around you. The cabin that protects you stands as a result of perseverance and practical skill, built by hands that once faced the same severe conditions you now experience. The mountain men who lived here were true survivors, learning to exist with a land that was both beautiful and dangerous. For them, building a cabin was only the beginning. Once the shelter was established, it became their lifeline. Every part of the structure, each log, stone, and beam, served a clear purpose, not only for protection but for survival. These cabins were made to endure harsh winters, offering shelter in a world where nature often showed little regard for human life. It was not just about resisting the elements. It was about making life in the wilderness sustainable, about forming a home from raw materials and determination. The mountain men who built these cabins were both craftsmen and survivalists. Every day in the wilderness tested their skills and resilience. The first winter spent inside these cabins was often the hardest. They could not predict exactly how the seasons would impact their shelters, how heavy snow would weigh on the roof, or how shifting winds would move through the trees. They had to learn quickly, adapting as conditions changed. This constant testing of their skills, their problem-solving ability, and their understanding of the land shaped them into experts in survival. You can imagine those early days, the harsh winds cutting through the forest, the heavy silence of snow-covered ground, and the ongoing effort to keep the fire alive. The fire was not a luxury. It was essential. Without it, the cold would take over. More than that, the fire represented hope. It symbolized the effort, discipline, and determination required to survive in such a harsh environment. Like the mountain men themselves, it required constant attention, its flames carefully maintained and never allowed to fade. When they first began building their cabins, the mountain men had no formal plans or designs. They depended on their understanding of the land and their ability to use what was available. The logs used for walls came from trees they cut themselves, and the stones for the foundation were gathered from nearby areas. Every piece had to be selected carefully, and every log placed with precision. There was no margin for error. Each part of the cabin needed to fit correctly to ensure it could withstand severe storms. Once the main structure was completed, the next step was making it livable. The walls needed sealing, the gaps filling, and the roof strengthening. Every space between logs was carefully packed with mud, moss, or even animal hair to block the wind. Each surface was checked, every crack filled, and every corner reinforced. The mountain men paid close attention to detail, knowing that even a small weakness could lead to serious consequences. They understood the importance of a well-built cabin, not only as shelter but as a place to survive long winters. A poorly built structure could mean the difference between life and death. Even after construction, the work never truly ended. The mountain men had to maintain their cabins continuously. Roofs were inspected after every snowfall. Firewood had to be cut and stored, and walls checked for damage. There was always another task, another issue to address. While they often worked alone, there was a strong sense of satisfaction in knowing they had created something reliable. Their cabins were more than simple structures. They represented resilience, adaptability, and a refusal to be overcome by nature. In many ways, the cabins reflected the mountain men themselves, simple, strong, and steady. These structures stood as clear evidence of their ability to survive in a world that offered little comfort. The fire burning inside was more than a source of heat. It served as a reminder of the effort, persistence, and determination that went into building their homes. The cabins provided warmth, protection, and security. But they also brought a sense of pride. These men created something from almost nothing, something that could endure through changing seasons, through storms, and through time. They built homes in places that were once untouched wilderness. As the storm continues outside, you feel a strong connection to the men who once lived here. Their cabins, though simple in design, were constructed with clear purpose and care. Every piece of wood, every stone, and every beam was set in place to form a home, a space to survive, to rest, and to find warmth in the cold. As the wind howls and the snow continues to fall, you begin to understand that the legacy of these mountain men still exists within the shelter you now occupy. The fire burns steadily in the hearth, its warmth surrounding you like a quiet comfort. In this moment, you know you are safe. Tomorrow, the work will go on. There will be more tasks to complete, more firewood to cut, more repairs to handle, and more challenges ahead. But tonight you rest. The cabin remains solid. The fire continues to burn, and the storm outside carries on. Yet inside you are protected. You are warm. You are part of an unbroken chain of survival that reaches back to the mountain men who first built these shelters in the wilderness. The night moves forward, but the warmth inside your cabin stays constant against the strong wind and intense cold outside. The fire, though beginning to fade slightly, still flickers with life, casting moving shadows across the logs that form the walls of your shelter. Outside, the snow has gathered deeply, covering the land in a thick layer of white. It becomes easy to picture what life must have been like for the mountain men who lived here before you. Men who, like you, endured long and severe winters, facing the elements with only their skills and determination to survive. For the men who originally built these cabins, survival was not simply about strength. It required building a life in a place that often seemed hostile. The wilderness offered no comfort. It provided no ready shelter, no guaranteed food, and no natural warmth. Each day brought its own struggle, and every decision, whether related to hunting, trapping, or maintaining the cabin, could determine survival. These men, living deep within forests and mountains, quickly understood the need for resourcefulness and adaptability. The cabins they built represented both protection and independence. They were not just places to sleep, they were complete homes. These shelters were created with a deep knowledge of the land, using materials gathered by hand. The walls, formed from logs cut with axes, and the roofs, reinforced with stone and mud, were designed to endure the harshest conditions. Nothing was built without intention. The fire, the hearth, and even the air inside the cabin all played essential roles in maintaining life in such a difficult environment. The first winter spent in these cabins was always the most challenging. It was during this time that the true reality of wilderness living became clear. Cold air pressed in from all sides, finding its way through even the smallest openings in the walls and roof, turning the cabin into a freezing space unless the fire was constantly maintained. Gathering firewood became a continuous task. The men who lived here understood that without a steady supply of wood, survival would not be possible. They cut and stored large amounts, filling every available space with logs to last through long nights. Food preparation was just as critical. The warmer months were spent collecting meat, then drying, smoking, and preserving it to last through winter. There were no outside supplies. What they stored was all they had. Careful planning was necessary to ensure it would be enough during the months when hunting became difficult and the cold made it nearly impossible to gather fresh food. These men became skilled in preservation methods such as salting, smoking, and drying, ensuring they had food long after their last successful hunt. Even with all this preparation, survival was never certain. The mountain men understood that they could do everything correctly, build strong shelters, gather enough wood, and prepare sufficient food, and still face serious risks. A heavy snowfall could collapse a roof. A trap could fail. Weather conditions could change suddenly. In the wilderness, certainty did not exist. They remained constantly active, always planning ahead and preparing for the unexpected. Survival came through a series of small, consistent successes, each one necessary to reach the next day. Physical effort was only one part of the challenge. Isolation was another. Being far removed from society tested them deeply. Many spent months without seeing another person. The silence of the wilderness could feel overwhelming. In such conditions, the cabins served as both protection and confinement. To cope, many men kept journals, recording daily events, noting successes and failures, and observing the environment around them. Writing became a way to stay connected, to process solitude, and to bring meaning to a life lived far from everything familiar. Work remained constant. They rose early and continued until night. Hunting, chopping wood, maintaining shelters, and preparing for future challenges filled their days. It was a life that required focus, where every task mattered and every resource had to be managed carefully. The cabins were more than structures. They were the basis of survival. These men did not simply build shelters. They created lives in an environment that offered little in return. The storm outside continues, but inside, you experience a sense of calm. You are safe within this cabin, built through the effort and determination of those before you. Tasks that once seemed difficult now feel routine. You begin to understand the rhythm of wilderness life, the balance between work and rest, the discipline required, and the persistence needed to continue despite difficulty. As you sit by the fire, you realize this cabin is more than a shelter. It stands as proof of strength and endurance. Now, you are part of that continuation. Outside, the storm remains intense, but inside, you are warm. The fire burns steadily, and the cabin stands firm as a symbol of survival and resilience. Tomorrow, you will continue the work, just as others did before you. But tonight you rest. You are part of something lasting, something beyond yourself. The storm shows no sign of stopping, yet within these walls, everything feels more controlled and manageable. Outside, the wind continues and snow keeps building. Inside, however, you remain safe, protected by the effort and resilience of those who came before you. The fire crackles softly, its warmth reaching every corner of the room, serving as a quiet reminder of the steady resilience of the mountain men who built this shelter. It is natural to wonder what their first winter must have been like in such a harsh, untamed land. The cold, the isolation, and the constant hard labor were endured with the quiet strength that shaped their lives. As the storm continues outside, you reflect on the depth of their survival. It was not only about enduring storms or long winters. It was about creating a place, this cabin, where they could not only survive, but also live with a sense of stability and calm amid the harsh environment. Every part of this cabin reflects their persistence, showing how they transformed wilderness into a place where life could be built. One of the biggest challenges the mountain men faced was securing enough food to last through severe winters. Once the snow arrived and the cold settled in, hunting became far more difficult. Large animals like deer were harder to locate, while smaller creatures such as rabbits and squirrels either became scarce or went into hiding. The men had to adapt, relying on all the skills they had developed over time to avoid hunger. They established detailed trap lines across the land, placing snares and deadfalls with care to capture small game. Trapping required patience as much as skill, waiting for results, checking traps daily, and making sure each setup remained effective. They also depended on their knowledge of the land for survival. They knew where to find edible plants even during winter, and how to use smaller animals like birds or beavers when larger prey was unavailable. The sound of snow underfoot, the careful checking of traps, and the anticipation of a catch all formed part of their daily rhythm. Their understanding of the land was deep. They knew its patterns and changes. Each successful catch strengthened their connection to the environment and confirmed their ability to survive within it. However, success was never guaranteed. Weather conditions could shift quickly, traps could fail, or animals might escape unnoticed. The mountain men always prepared for these risks. Preserving food was essential. They smoked, dried, and salted meat to ensure supplies lasted through the harshest months. Their focus was not only on immediate needs but also on future survival. Food storage became as essential as maintaining a fire, and the process became a natural part of their routine. As the fire continues to burn, the wind howls outside, reminding you of how unforgiving the wilderness can be. Inside the cabin, however, there is protection. The storm may rage on, but within these walls, there is safety. This place carries the legacy of those who came before, individuals who endured and adapted. Their cabins were more than simple shelters. They represented determination, creativity, and the will to survive. Every log and stone used in construction reflects their ability to live and build in a place that offered very little. Their strength remains present in the structure around you. Still, as you sit near the fire, a sense of quiet reflection emerges. Survival is not only about building shelters, setting traps, or keeping a fire alive. It requires persistence and a steady commitment to keep moving forward, even when conditions are difficult. The mountain men faced uncertainty every day, with new challenges always possible. Yet they continued forward. They did more than survive. They lived and shaped their environment. Their cabins, still standing today, reflect that enduring effort. Tomorrow, when the storm ends, the routine will continue, checking traps, gathering wood, and maintaining the cabin. The work never stops. But for now, the fire remains lit. The storm continues outside, while you rest in safety. The cabin stands strong, offering protection, with sturdy walls and a steady fire keeping the cold away. Even in the long night, there is comfort within these walls. In quiet moments, you feel connected to the mountain men who once lived here. They faced the same storms, endured the same cold, isolation, and constant demands of survival. Yet they succeeded. The fire, the logs, and the cabin all represent their strength and their ability to create life in a difficult environment. As the wind continues to blow and snow falls outside, You understand that you are part of that legacy. You are safe because of their effort and determination. You are not alone. The night continues as the storm remains active outside. The wind strikes the cabin, and snow falls heavily, covering the land in a cold, white layer. Inside, however, there is still peace. The fire burns low, softly crackling and filling the room with a warm, comforting atmosphere. Its heat spreads through the cabin, with glowing embers resting in the hearth. This space offers protection from the harsh conditions outside. For the mountain men, this cabin was more than just a structure. It was a place of safety, a center for daily life, and a base for survival. Living in such a demanding environment required constant effort. It was not enough to simply build a cabin and leave it as it was. They had to maintain it regularly, keeping the structure strong, the fire alive, and supplies sufficient for the next season. Beyond the cabin, the real challenge was the wilderness itself. The mountain men were highly adaptable, understanding that survival required constant adjustment. Hunting, trapping, and foraging were not just tasks, they were essential ways of living. Every action carried weight, as mistakes could have serious consequences. The land around them presented many dangers, including wild animals, unpredictable weather, and the constant risk of starvation. Instead of avoiding these challenges, the mountain men faced them directly. They studied the land, learned animal behavior, and observed seasonal patterns. Over time, they became closely connected to their surroundings, moving in rhythm with nature. Hunting was one of the most important skills they relied on. In the early stages, it was their primary source of food. Without farms or stored supplies, they depended entirely on their ability to track and hunt animals. They used every part of what they killed, ensuring nothing was wasted. A successful hunt provided more than food, it provided security until the next opportunity. A missed shot or failed trap could result in days without food, making careful planning essential. The mountain men understood that the animals they hunted were also fighting to survive. Because of this, hunting required patience, timing, and precision. It was a constant balance of skill and awareness. Even with experience and knowledge, hunting could never be fully guaranteed, keeping survival always uncertain. The mountain men often spent days tracking game and would sometimes return with nothing. In those times, preserving food became just as essential as hunting. They learned how to dry meat, smoke fish, and store root vegetables for long periods. Preservation was not only about having food available, it was about surviving the months when hunting was nearly impossible. The long, harsh winters could last for months, and the preparations made during the fall determined whether they would endure. Without enough stored food, their survival would be at risk. Preserving food required skill and care. Meat had to be properly salted and smoked, vegetables were kept in the ground, and fish were dried in the wind. The cabin itself became part of this system. Meat was hung from the rafters, jars of preserved fruits and berries were stored in corners, and every space was used for storage. The smell of drying meat, salted fish, and herbs filled the cabin during these months, serving as a constant reminder of the effort required to survive. When you sit in this cabin now, with the fire burning and the storm outside, you feel a strong connection to those who lived here before. Their lives were centered on survival, hunting, preserving food, maintaining shelter, and staying warm. They did not have modern conveniences. Everything had to be earned through hard work. Even in isolation and under difficult conditions, they continued with determination. Their resilience was steady and quiet. That same strength is reflected in the cabin you now call home. In the silence, with only the fire and the storm for company, you begin to understand what they endured. Their lives were constantly challenged by the environment, and they responded with strength, skill, and persistence. They adapted to difficult conditions without complaint. They understood that survival was not only about physical strength. It required knowledge of the land, awareness of natural signs, and careful preparation. As the fire burns low and the storm continues outside, you recognize that survival in the wilderness is about persistence, resilience, and determination to thrive under pressure. As the night continues, the storm feels less overwhelming. You are in this cabin, connected to the legacy of those who came before. The work remains, and challenges will continue, But for now, you are safe. Tomorrow will bring more tasks, gathering wood, collecting food, and maintaining the cabin. For now, you rest, knowing that the spirit of survival remains within you. Outside, the storm may have eased, but the wind still moves through the walls, reminding you that the wilderness is never fully quiet. Inside, there is stillness and warmth from the fire. Snow covers the landscape, turning trees into heavy, silent figures and the land into a harsh, white expanse. Yet inside the cabin, you are protected from the elements. The mountain men who built these cabins understood isolation. They created homes from the land itself, places to rest, recover, and protect themselves from cold and loneliness. Each day required working with nature rather than against it. The land provided resources, but only to those who knew how to use them wisely. They built for survival, not just for seasonal conditions but for constant change. There were no shortcuts. Every task, collecting firewood, maintaining the cabin, setting traps, required time and skill. Wasting time could have serious consequences. A poorly maintained cabin could collapse under heavy snow, and improperly stored food could spoil. In the wilderness, mistakes could be fatal. Beyond physical challenges, isolation was one of the hardest aspects. They often spent months, even years, without seeing another person. The silence was intense, and the days were long. Despite this, they remained strong both physically and mentally. They could not allow loneliness to weaken them. In these moments, the cabin became more than shelter. It became essential for survival, offering warmth, stability, and a sense of security in an unpredictable world. It stood as a symbol of their ability to endure and create a life in the wilderness. As you sit by the fire, the sound of burning wood fills the space. Outside, the storm continues, but inside there is calm. The work of the day is complete, and you have made it through another night. The mountain men lived this way as well, continuing day after day, year after year. Even in extreme conditions, they understood that survival meant working with nature and adapting to it. However, the wilderness was never fully controlled. It always remained nearby, ready to challenge everything they built. Still, in facing these constant challenges, they found purpose. Small successes, a steady fire, a successful trap, a strong cabin, gave meaning to their efforts. The wilderness did not make survival easy. Instead, it tested their strength and determination. It gave them the chance to prove their resilience and ability to build a life in a demanding environment. The fire in the hearth crackles more strongly as the last pieces of wood turn into glowing embers. You can feel its warmth slowly spreading through your body, offering comfort in the otherwise cold and silent cabin. As you reflect on the early days, you think about the first people who settled here. And you realize an important truth: survival is not just about what you have, but how you use what is available to you. Those early settlers had very little. They had the land, their intelligence, and the tools they could create with their own hands. And that was enough to survive. Outside, the wind continues to howl, but inside, you remain safe. The cabin stands firm against the storm, showing the strength and endurance of those who lived here before you. There is still work to be done tomorrow. Tasks never truly end. Firewood must be chopped, traps checked, and the cabin maintained. But for now, you rest. The quiet of the storm outside contrasts with the steady warmth inside, giving you a sense of satisfaction that you have made it through another day. You are connected to the same legacy as those mountain men. A legacy built on strength, survival, and determination to endure. Tomorrow the storm will pass and you will step back into the wilderness. But tonight, you are safe. Tonight you rest. The storm has started to weaken. The strong wind has turned into a faint whisper moving through the trees. The outside world has changed. What was once a violent mix of snow and ice is now a calm, frozen landscape, quiet and still. Yet the cabin remains strong. The work done over the past days and weeks, cutting trees, stacking wood, sealing gaps in the walls, has proven its worth. You are safe here, protected in the warmth of a shelter built by people who were determined to survive, endure, and grow in this harsh environment. As you sit near the fire, watching the final embers fade, you think about the mountain men who built this cabin. For them, building a shelter was not only about having a place to live. It was also a way to establish their presence in the land. The wilderness was harsh and unforgiving, but they created a space for themselves within it. The cabin became more than just shelter. It represented their resilience, their ability to adapt, and their deep connection to the land they lived on. However, building the cabin was only the first step. The real challenge was maintaining it, and maintaining their place in the wilderness. The environment outside was constantly changing with weather, seasons, and the demands of nature. The true test of survival was not just building a shelter, but staying alert, keeping it in good condition, and continuing to survive day after day. One of the most important elements in this process was managing the fire. The fire was not only a source of heat, it was the center of the cabin. It provided warmth, light, and a way to prepare food. The mountain men understood that without fire, survival would not be possible. The cold mountain air could quickly become dangerous, and without heat, the cabin would lose its purpose. The fire required constant attention, both day and night. There were no breaks when it came to keeping it alive. Every piece of wood added to the fire acted as a source of life, helping to keep the cold away. But keeping the fire burning was only part of the challenge. Finding fuel was equally important. The men had to continuously gather wood, chopping and stacking it to make sure they had enough for the long winter months. They worked without pause, knowing that every log they prepared meant another night of warmth and another day of survival. This work never stopped. They would wake before sunrise, go out into the cold, find fallen trees, cut the wood, and bring it back to the cabin. They understood that this effort was constant, but it was necessary to stay alive. Even with enough wood, fire alone was not enough. They had to be resourceful in every possible way. Every part of the animals they hunted was used: meat for food, fur for warmth, and bones for tools. The mountain men had a deep understanding of how to make the most out of every resource available. The wilderness did not give freely, everything had to be earned. And they earned it through hard work, long hours, and continuous effort. Survival required many different tasks: hunting, gathering, building, and maintaining the cabin, all working together as one system. Food gathered from hunting, trapping, or foraging had to be preserved carefully. Fresh food was not available all year, so they had to learn methods like drying, smoking, salting, and storing food to make it last through the seasons. The smell of preserved meat and herbs became a normal part of life, just like the scent of burning wood. Preserving food was just as important as collecting it. It allowed them to survive during long, harsh winters when food was scarce. You can imagine their daily routine, the steady, disciplined life they lived. Waking at sunrise, tending the fire, checking traps, and beginning the day's work. Every action had meaning. There was no wasted time. Each task contributed to the greater goal of survival and keeping the cabin a safe place in the wilderness. The work was difficult, and the isolation could feel heavy, but they managed to endure. They built a life in a place that offered very little, and in doing so, they found a sense of peace. Now, as you sit in your own cabin with the fire reduced to a soft glow, you feel a connection to those who came before you. The solitude can sometimes feel overwhelming, but it also brings a kind of calm. You have created a space for yourself in the world, just as they did. You have built shelter, maintained your fire, and prepared for whatever comes next. The wilderness remains unpredictable and wild. But within these walls, you are safe. Tomorrow, the work continues. The tasks never truly stop, and survival requires constant attention. Yet tonight, as the last embers fade, you know you have done your part. The storm has passed, and tomorrow will bring new responsibilities. But for now, you are at peace. The cabin stands strong as your refuge. You have endured, and you are part of the same legacy as those who built it. Their strength and resilience continue through you. Morning arrives quietly. The storm's power has finally faded, leaving behind a peaceful world covered in snow. The sun is weak but present, breaking through the clouds and casting a soft light over the frozen landscape. The world outside lies quiet and still, as though it is pausing after the storm. Inside the cabin, however, the day begins with a steady rhythm of work. The fire has weakened overnight, and the warmth it once gave has slowly faded. It is time to bring it back to life and begin the day's tasks that will help you move through the challenges of the long winter ahead. As you rise from your bed, you look around the cabin. The solid walls, the fireplace that always needs care, and the shelves filled with preserved food all serve as reminders that survival here requires constant effort. The men who lived in this cabin before understood this well. They did not only focus on building the shelter, they knew that keeping it in good condition, managing supplies, and maintaining the fire were equally important for survival. The first task is always the fire. Without it, the cold would spread through every corner of the cabin. The fire is a constant presence, a source of warmth in an otherwise harsh environment. The mountain men knew how to start a fire from nothing, often using whatever materials were available to keep it burning. The first spark and the sound of kindling catching flame represent a small but important success, a reminder that warmth can still exist even in isolation. The fire is not just for comfort, it is essential for survival. It allows cooking, drying meat, and protecting against the cold of long nights. It truly forms the center of the cabin. Once the fire is steady, attention turns to the rest of the cabin. Maintenance is just as important as keeping the fire alive. After every snowfall, the roof must be checked, as heavy snow can build up and risk collapse. The walls also need care. Any gaps between the logs must be filled with materials like moss, clay, or animal hair to block the wind. Even a small draft can make the cabin dangerously cold. The mountain men constantly inspected and repaired their shelter, ensuring it could withstand the next storm. Staying alert was not optional, it was necessary. Outside, the landscape remains frozen and covered in snow. The air is sharp and cold, yet there is a certain calm in the environment. Those who lived here before understood that the land was both beautiful and harsh, a place of isolation, but also of freedom. The mountains were demanding, yet they offered something valuable: independence. There were no imposed rules, no one to dictate actions. The land could be shaped and used as needed. Though the life was difficult, it provided a sense of freedom that was difficult to find elsewhere. The day ahead includes familiar responsibilities: gathering firewood, checking traps, and ensuring the cabin remains secure. But beyond these daily tasks, there is a deeper purpose. It is not only about surviving another day or another winter. It is about proving the ability to endure and even succeed in a place that challenges you constantly. The mountain men who built these cabins were not simply trying to survive. They were building lives in the wilderness, creating something meaningful from very little. They shaped their surroundings and established a place for themselves in a world that offered little support. In doing so, they created something lasting. As you continue your routine, cutting wood and inspecting traps, you reflect on those who came before. They worked without maps, guides, or roads. They relied on instinct, knowledge of the land, and the ability to use what the wilderness provided. Every log they cut, every trap they set, and every gap they sealed represents their effort to survive. The cabin they built is more than a shelter. It stands as a symbol of resilience, skill, and determination. It shows how they transformed a difficult environment into a place they could call home. In many ways, their story continues through your actions. The work you do each day is similar to what kept them alive. You are part of that ongoing legacy. You are living in a place shaped by those who understood survival, adaptation, and creation. The cabin itself is a reminder that, even in a challenging world, it is possible to establish a place of safety and make it your own. As the day continues and the storm fades, a sense of quiet accomplishment settles in. The fire is steady once again. The cabin is secure. The outside world is calm. While tomorrow will bring new challenges, for now, the day's work is complete. You can rest knowing that you are part of a long tradition of resilience and survival. The mountain men who built these cabins did more than survive. They adapted and created a life in the wilderness. Now you are part of that same success. Outside, the post-storm world offers a calm contrast to the harsh weather of earlier days. As sunlight rises, it reflects off the snow, casting long shadows across the land. The scene appears peaceful, almost still. However, the wilderness is always changing. It may seem calm, but it holds hidden risks and ongoing challenges. Inside the cabin, you remain safe for now. The fire continues to provide warmth, and the walls stand firm against the cold. You think ahead to the tasks that await you. Like every day in the wilderness, work is necessary. Firewood must be gathered again, and traps must be checked. The cabin requires constant maintenance. Even small issues, such as a loose log or a crack in the wall, can become serious problems during harsh weather. The mountain men who built this cabin understood this reality. Their survival depended on how well they maintained their shelter, the tools they used, and their understanding of the environment. They were not just surviving, they were building a life that could endure the demands of the wilderness. For them, the cabin was more than a place to sleep. It represented their effort and success. Every log placed, every gap sealed, and every piece of wood cut was proof of their persistence. They were not only constructing a structure, they were creating a life, building a place where they could live and grow despite the challenges around them. The cabin they built was not merely a shelter. It stood as a clear expression of their determination to endure and adapt. The work that filled their days was constant. They had to act as both skilled builders and survivalists, continuously adjusting to shifting seasons and the unpredictable conditions of the land. The men living here did more than hunt and trap. They had to develop a complete understanding of survival. They needed deep knowledge of the land, its patterns, and its challenges. They learned to work alongside the land, using it to construct shelter, gather food, and protect themselves from threats. They understood the value of planning ahead, preparing for winter while the weather was still mild, collecting firewood, preserving food, and reinforcing their homes before the snow arrived. The greatest challenge they faced in the wilderness was isolation. It was not only the cold or the presence of predators, but also the loneliness. 4 months at a time, they would see no other people. They were cut off from the world they once knew. In such solitude, the cabin became more than shelter. It became a place of comfort and safety. The mountain men knew how to structure their days with purpose, hunting, repairing the cabin, or writing their thoughts in journals. Yet even in quiet moments, they recognized the mental strain that isolation could bring. Sitting by the fire and watching the embers glow, one can feel a connection to those men. Their lives unfolded in this same space. They faced the same cold, isolation, constant labor, and the quiet strength needed to keep moving forward. They were part of a broader story, survival in a harsh and unforgiving environment. Their carefully built cabins stand as proof of their resilience. Today, you continue the work they began. The fire requires attention, food supplies must be maintained, and the cabin itself needs upkeep. The cold will always remain outside, and the wind will continue to press against the walls. But inside, there is safety, a protected space from the harsh world beyond. The cabin stands firm, its logs solid and its foundation strong. It reminds you that despite the challenges of the world, you have created a place where survival is possible, where rest and basic comfort can exist. The mountain men who built this cabin did not have modern conveniences. There were no roads or stores. They relied entirely on what the land provided. In such a demanding environment, they created something from very little. They built lives with their own hands, constructing homes that reflected both resilience and practicality. Their cabins were more than structures. They represented their connection to the land, their understanding of the wilderness, and their ability to adapt to it. As you prepare for the day, you recognize that their legacy exists not only in the cabin itself but also in your daily actions. Every log you chop, every trap you check, and every gap you seal is a small achievement, a sign of your own resilience and commitment. The wilderness may be cold and challenging, but like those who came before you, you are learning to live within it. The difficulties will continue, yet with each passing day, you grow stronger, more connected to the land, and more accustomed to this environment. After the storm, the work still continues. As you step outside and feel the cold air on your face, it becomes clear that survival is not just about enduring harsh conditions. It is about adapting and functioning within them. With every task completed and every challenge faced, you become part of the enduring spirit of the mountain men. The sun now rests low in the sky, casting long shadows over the snow-covered landscape. The morning's work is complete. Wood has been chopped, the fire has been restored, and the traps have been checked. However, the work is never truly finished. In the wilderness, there is always something that requires attention. As you sit by the fire and take a moment to rest, you think about the men who lived here before you and built this cabin with their own hands. They, too, spent long hours attending to the smallest details to ensure survival in such a demanding place. Their struggle was not only against the cold but also against isolation. They often went long periods without seeing anyone else. For many, this was simply a way of life. They did not fear isolation. Instead, they accepted it. They understood that in such an untamed environment, self-reliance was essential. The cabin served as both shelter and defense, a place of safety against the harsh conditions outside. Still, solitude was not always easy. Survival required more than strength. It demanded patience and resourcefulness. Even a small mistake could have serious consequences. They did not have access to modern conveniences, so their cabins needed to be strong, well-built, and capable of withstanding extreme conditions. Every log and stone had to be placed with care. Precision was necessary, as no gaps or weaknesses could be allowed. Alongside physical effort, the mental impact of isolation was equally significant. Being far from any community could affect even the strongest individuals. The mountain men understood that survival required balance between physical endurance and mental resilience. They learned to find peace in the land itself, taking comfort in the quiet, with only the fire and the wind for company. This isolation was not a weakness, it was a test of strength. You reflect on how this same spirit has become part of your life. The work, the isolation, and the daily routine all feel like elements of a larger journey, one that connects you to those who lived here before. Like them, you have learned to adapt. The cabin is not just protection from the cold, it represents survival itself. Each day, you continue to learn about the land, the weather, and its natural patterns. You begin to understand its cycles, the calm before storms, the stillness after they pass, and how the land both challenges and supports you. Tasks that once felt endless now follow a clear rhythm. Maintaining the fire, managing food, and caring for the cabin have become routine. As you step outside again to check the traps, you are met with the quiet of the snow-covered surroundings. The cold air touches your face, and the snow crunches under your feet. Despite the harsh conditions, there is a sense of calm in this environment. The wilderness, though demanding, carries a quiet and natural beauty. The wind moves gently through the trees, and the world remains untouched by the noise of modern life. This is a place where survival defines daily existence, a life that demands respect for the land, the elements, and the knowledge passed down from those who came before. You walk toward the traps, your boots pressing deep into the snow. The crunch beneath your feet is the only sound, forming a steady rhythm that echoes in the quiet surroundings. As you inspect the traps, you see that the wilderness, despite its hardships, also provides rewards. The animals from the land and the resources available are all part of a connected system. The mountain men understood this clearly. They knew that to live and succeed here, they had to respect the land, work alongside it, and take only what was necessary. The land does not give easily, but it offers opportunities to those willing to learn. The mountain men became skilled in this way of life. They mastered adapting to their environment and using resources with care. Instead of resisting nature, they learned to live in harmony with it. They understood that survival was not only about enduring harsh conditions, but also about knowing when to wait, when to move, and when to act. Through this balance, they built a sustainable life in the wilderness. As you return to the cabin, you carry that same understanding with you. The mountain men did not just survive, they thrived. They created lives from the wilderness, using resources that most people would avoid. They built cabins and, more importantly, they built a deep connection with the land that allowed them to live independently. The storm outside has now passed. The wind has softened, but the work remains. There is always something to be done. Still, there is a quiet satisfaction in having a place here. A cabin built by your own hands, much like those who came before you. With each passing day, you become part of that same legacy. The cabin stands strong, its structure secure, and the fire burns steadily. Outside, the world may be harsh, but inside there is warmth. Here, You are not merely surviving, you are thriving. Like the mountain men, you have learned to adapt, live in harmony with the wilderness, and build a life that lasts. As evening fades, the outside world becomes calm and almost dreamlike. The setting sun reflects off the snow, coloring the land in soft shades of pink and gold. The storm has passed, leaving behind a deep stillness. In moments like these, with the fire quietly burning and the night settling in, the legacy of those who came before becomes clear. The mountain men who once lived here did not simply endure the wilderness, they lived it fully. Their presence remains in the structure of the cabin, in the ground beneath you, and in the air around you. The cabin is more than shelter, it reflects their strength, skill, and determination. Every log was placed with purpose, and every detail was built with care. They understood that survival required not only physical strength, but also resilience in isolation. Life in the wilderness meant long periods away from others, far from familiar places. To cope, they stayed busy working the land. In their free time, they found comfort in writing, reading letters, or simply observing the landscape. These habits helped them maintain focus and purpose despite the solitude. Their lives were shaped by hard work. The sound of tools, chopping wood, and tending fires defined their days. Though demanding, this work gave them a sense of achievement. Nothing was handed to them. Everything they needed, food, warmth, and shelter, came from their own effort. There was deep satisfaction in this way of life. It came from knowing they had created something meaningful through persistence and skill. Sitting now by the fire, you recognize that you are part of this same tradition. The daily tasks you perform are the same ones that sustain the mountain men. The fire, the food, and the cabin all depend on your attention. While isolation still exists, it no longer feels overwhelming. The cabin serves as your refuge, built from the same simple materials used long ago. The fire remains steady, and the wind moves outside, but within these walls, there is comfort and calm. Tomorrow, the work will continue. You will gather wood, check the traps, and maintain the strength of the cabin against whatever comes next. But tonight is for rest. The storm has passed, and a peaceful stillness surrounds you. You are part of this land, just as those before you were. You have learned to live with the wilderness rather than against it, creating something lasting in the process. The mountain men understood the challenges of the wilderness, but they also recognized its value. They viewed the land not as an obstacle, but as a partner in survival. They knew it could provide, but only through respect and understanding. This belief allowed them to build homes, endure harsh winters, and create independent lives. As you sit by the fire, you reflect on that same mindset. The wilderness remains unpredictable, yet within the cabin, you are safe. The fire glows steadily while the outside world stays quiet. For this moment, you are not just surviving, you are living. The legacy of the mountain men lives on through your actions. In your ability to adapt, endure, and find peace in solitude, you carry their spirit forward. Tomorrow brings more work, but for now you rest, knowing you are part of a story passed down through generations. Outside, the night remains still. The snow lies deep and undisturbed, covering the land in a quiet, cold glow. The moon, faint yet bright, casts long shadows over the land, turning every snow-covered branch into a silhouette. The wind has calmed to a soft whisper, replacing the earlier howling with quiet stillness across the wilderness. In this moment, everything appears peaceful. Yet inside your cabin, there is a steady sense of readiness for whatever tomorrow may bring. You sit beside the fire as the embers glow red and warm, casting a gentle flicker across the cabin walls. The stillness of the night brings comfort, but it also reminds you of the ongoing effort required to live here. There is never truly a long moment of rest. The mountain men who built this cabin understood this well. For them, every quiet moment was only a short pause before the next challenge. The cold never fully disappeared, food was never fully plentiful, and isolation never fully eased. Each day required strength to face the tasks ahead, no matter how tiring or demanding. The cabin, though small, served as a strong barrier against the wilderness. Every log was carefully selected and placed with care. The roof had to be sturdy enough to hold the snow, the walls tight enough to block the wind, and the foundation strong enough to support the structure over time. Those who built it did more than construct a shelter. They built a way of life in the mountains. They understood that even small gaps in the walls could allow the cold to enter, so they ensured everything was sealed tightly against the elements. It is easy to imagine the men who first lived here, their days filled with labor and quiet determination. Every log they cut, every wall they raised, and every piece of firewood they stacked reflected their understanding that survival required constant effort. There were no shortcuts and no one else to depend on. They relied entirely on their skills and their knowledge of the land. The wilderness was both a resource and a challenge. It provided what they needed, but also demanded respect. The mountain men who built this cabin understood this balance. The fire crackles and pops, sending small embers into the air, while its warmth fills the quiet cabin. Outside, the cold is intense, the kind that seeps into the body, but inside, the fire offers relief. For those mountain men, this fire was essential. It kept the cold away, allowed them to cook, dry their clothes, and survive. The fire was more than heat. It was the core of their home, a vital element of life in the wilderness. Even though the storm has passed, the wilderness is never truly still. Tomorrow will bring more tasks. Firewood must be gathered, traps checked, and the cabin maintained. Yet there is a quiet sense of fulfillment in being part of this ongoing cycle of survival. These daily responsibilities, though continuous, keep you grounded in this place. Each task, each decision becomes a small victory over the cold and isolation. The wilderness may be harsh, but with every log cut, every trap set, and every meal prepared, you affirm your place within it. The mountain men who lived here before you adapted constantly to their surroundings. They learned to use every available resource, hunting, fishing, trapping, and gathering from the land. They built their homes from the surrounding trees and survived even when the land offered little. They understood the natural rhythms of the wilderness, the seasons, the weather, and animal movement, and worked in harmony with them. This way of life required both patience and skill. Sitting by the fire now, you feel a strong connection to them. Their legacy continues within this cabin, in the steady fire, and in the tasks that await you. The mountains, the cold, and the isolation remain unchanged, but now you are part of that story. You have learned to survive here, to build a life in a place that seems to offer little. With each passing day and every completed task, you establish your place in this environment, just as they once did. Tomorrow will bring new challenges. The cold will return, the wind will rise again, and the work will continue. But tonight, the fire remains warm, and the cabin stands firm. The men who built this place used their hands to create a life here, and now you continue that legacy. The fire crackles softly, and the stillness of the night reminds you of the strength required to survive in such a place. You are part of that strength, part of that enduring spirit. As you rest by the fire, you know you are not alone. The cabin serves as your refuge, your home. As long as the fire burns and the structure holds, you will endure. Tomorrow, the work resumes. The cold will test you again, but for now, you rest, knowing that the mountain men who came before would recognize and respect your efforts. You are continuing their story. The fire remains a steady presence as daylight fades. Outside, darkness covers the snow-filled landscape. The storm has passed, and the wilderness has returned to its natural rhythm. Inside the cabin, there is a quiet stillness that brings peace, earned through days and weeks of effort. The men who once lived here would have known this feeling, the calm that follows hard work, the sense of accomplishment in surviving another day in this vast and untamed land. As you sit by the fire, the weight of the day settles in. The wood is stacked, the traps checked, and the cabin secured. The day's work is complete, leaving you time to reflect. The mountain men lived in a similar rhythm, steadily working toward the next task without end. Though the work never stopped, each task gave them purpose. They did not seek comfort or luxury, their focus was survival. Every part of their shelter had a role in that goal. Their isolation was not only physical but also emotional. Living far from civilization meant relying entirely on themselves. There were no neighbors to help share burdens. They faced the land alone and learned to find strength within that solitude. The cabin, though modest, provided both safety and a sense of peace within the harsh wilderness. You can almost hear the echo of footsteps within the cabin, the sounds of men working, living, and surviving in the very space you now occupy. Outside, the wind may howl and the cold may press against the walls, yet inside they discovered warmth, not only from the fire, but from the work itself. Every log split, every meal prepared, every part of the cabin maintained contributed to their survival. They did not merely survive the land, they lived alongside it, used it, and found ways to thrive within it. Now, as you sit here wrapped in the warmth of the fire, you can sense the weight of their legacy. The fire burns low but steady, offering a constant glow, a reminder of the effort required for survival. The wilderness remains unchanged, and the work is never truly finished. Yet you have come to understand what they knew. Survival is not just about existing. It is about building a life, creating something that endures, and finding peace even in quiet isolation. Thoughts of tomorrow already begin to form. Firewood will need to be gathered again. Traps must be checked. The cabin will require ongoing care. But for tonight you rest. The work is complete for now. The fire remains steady, and the cabin stands strong against the cold. Outside, the wilderness waits as it always has, but inside, you are protected. The mountain men who built this cabin did not have the luxury of long rest, yet they understood that moments of peace were just as important as moments of labor. These moments were part of the cycle of survival, just as they are for you now. Tomorrow the storms may return, and the cold will once again test the strength of your shelter. But tonight, as the fire flickers and the wind softly moves outside, you are part of something greater, something enduring and timeless. You are following in the footsteps of those who built a life here, who shaped the land with their work, and who endured despite the odds. With each passing day, you add your own contribution to that legacy. The fire continues to burn quietly, the embers glowing in the hearth. As you settle into the calm of the cabin, you feel a deep sense of peace that comes from knowing you have fulfilled your responsibilities. Tomorrow, the work will begin again. But tonight, you rest with the understanding that you have created a life here, just as those before you did. You have made your place in the wilderness and learned not just to endure, but to live. The cabin is your home, your refuge, and in the stillness of the night, it feels like more than just wood and stone. It feels alive, built from the effort and spirit of those who came before, and now from your own hands. Tomorrow will bring new tasks, new challenges, and new progress. But for tonight, you are safe. The fire burns steadily, the world outside is calm, and you rest knowing you are part of the lasting legacy of the mountain men who lived in this wilderness. They showed that survival is not only about enduring hardship, but about thriving in it. The silence of the night remains unbroken, except for the gentle crackling of the fire. Though the wind has calmed, it has already left its presence, having swept through the trees earlier. Now, there is only a quiet, steady stillness across the land. Moonlight spreads over the snow, casting a soft, silvery glow, while the stars above appear clearer and closer, as if resting after the storm. The air is sharp, crisp, and clean. Inside the cabin, you are protected, surrounded by warmth from the fire and the efforts of those who came before. The cabin stands as a quiet symbol of the mountain men who built it, their labor, their endurance, and their determination. Every log in the wall, every beam in the structure, every carefully carved joint tells a story of survival, adaptation, and persistence in a harsh environment. Their work was never easy. The land demanded constant effort. But through that effort, they found purpose and rhythm. There was no room for complacency. Each day required action to protect what they had built, to maintain shelter, fire, and food. Now, as you sit by the fire, you feel that same rhythm within you. The tasks that once felt overwhelming are now second nature. Cutting wood, tending the fire, checking traps, these simple actions have become the core of your daily life. They are no longer just tasks, but part of your routine and purpose. Each action connects you to those who came before. The men who built this cabin understood the importance of every small effort, because in the wilderness, nothing can be taken for granted. What once felt like isolation now feels like space to breathe. Your days are filled with work, but the quiet moments by the fire, when only the sound of crackling wood and distant wind can be heard, bring a sense of peace. These were the moments that gave strength to the mountain men. They lived not only with the land, but with themselves. In solitude, they learned to accept isolation and find meaning within it. Though challenging, isolation also brought clarity, a chance to reflect and connect with something deeper and more lasting than daily struggle. You are now part of that same tradition. The mountain men understood that survival required more than physical strength. It required mental strength, the ability to continue through cold, isolation, and constant work while still finding purpose. That lesson now applies to you as well. The work of survival never fully ends, but with each day, you grow stronger in both body and mind. You learn to trust yourself, rely on the land, and respect the solitude around you. Outside, snow continues to cover the land, concealing everything beneath a quiet white layer. The wilderness remains vast, untamed, and indifferent. Yet within these walls, you have created a secure place. The cabin is a shelter, but also a reflection of resilience, both of those who built it and of your own growth. You are not simply surviving here, you are living here, shaping your place within the wilderness. Like those before you, you are learning to thrive in quiet, in solitude, and through daily work. Tomorrow, the cycle will continue. The wind will return, the cold will press against the walls, and more work will be required. But for now, you rest in peace. The fire burns steadily, warmth fills the cabin, and you sit with the satisfaction of your own efforts. This moment of rest is earned. The mountain men who lived here before worked without pause, carrying forward the same cycle of effort and survival, always moving between labor and brief moments of rest. But they also understood the importance of quiet moments like these, moments to reflect on their efforts, to rest, and to find comfort in the stillness of the wilderness. As you sit beside the fire, the gentle glow of the embers reflecting in your eyes, you are reminded of the legacy you are now part of. The wilderness may challenge you, but it has also shaped who you are. The cabin built by those before you has become your home, your refuge, and a symbol of endurance, strength, and resilience. The work will never truly stop, but for now, there is peace. The fire crackles, the wind moves softly through the trees, and you remain safe within these walls, part of an unbroken chain of survival that stretches across generations. As the first light of dawn enters through the small cabin window, it casts long beams of pale sunlight across the room. The fire, though fading, still holds warmth, a sign that the night has passed and a new day has begun. Outside, the world remains still. The snow lies untouched, except for your own footprints from the previous day. The storm has passed, but the wilderness is never completely calm. The cold begins to return, and the land waits, ready for the work ahead. The mountain men who lived here before you understood this cycle well. The quiet after the storm, and the stillness that is always followed by the demands of survival. You stand and stretch, feeling the cool air against your skin. Inside, the cabin remains warm in contrast, with the hearth serving as a constant source of comfort and protection against the cold. The fire is beginning to fade, but the embers still glow faintly, a reminder of the night's warmth. For the mountain men who built this cabin, fire was essential. It was more than warmth, it was survival. Without it, the cold would take over, and their chances of survival would drop significantly. However, survival in this environment required more than fire. It demanded knowledge, skill, and constant awareness. The men who built this cabin were resourceful, always preparing for the seasons ahead. They had no stored supplies to depend on, no markets to turn to in difficult times. Instead, they relied entirely on the land, its animals, its plants, and its rivers. They knew how to hunt, trap, preserve food, and use every resource available. Each day was filled with work, gathering firewood, checking traps, repairing the cabin, and preparing food. With every task completed, they found a sense of progress, knowing they were one step closer to enduring another day. As you prepare for your day, you feel that same connection. The work may seem simple, chopping wood, checking traps, repairing the cabin, but these tasks form the foundation of survival. The mountain men did not have the comfort of convenience. They had no community to rely on, no one to assist them in difficult times. They built their homes with their own hands and maintained them through constant effort. Through determination and hard work, they created a life in the wilderness, one where survival was not only possible but sustainable. The air feels cold as you step outside, the chill entering your lungs. The landscape, though visually striking in its stillness, is harsh and unforgiving. Deep snow stretches endlessly, and the trees stand silent in the distance like watchful guardians. The world seems to be waiting, but this waiting requires action. There are traps to check, firewood to gather, and repairs to complete. Yet there is also a quiet beauty in the landscape, a raw, untouched quality that reflects both solitude and freedom. The mountain men who once lived here recognized this beauty, but they also understood its dangers. The wilderness could be unforgiving. Still, through daily effort, they built a relationship with the land, learning its patterns, respecting its strength, and using it to survive. As you walk toward the traps, the crisp sound of snow beneath your feet is the only sound breaking the silence. Each step feels meaningful, as if you are becoming part of this land, leaving a mark in a place few people ever reach. The traps, carefully placed, reflect the adaptability of the mountain men. They depended on these traps to catch smaller animals when larger game was not available. Although the land was difficult, they learned to work with it, using its resources to sustain themselves. Checking the traps is a familiar task, part of the daily routine. The cold, the silence, and the steady rhythm all feel natural, as if they have always been a part of life here. The mountain men who lived here were not truly alone. They were connected through a shared way of life, united by the land and the responsibilities they carried. The traps, like the cabin, were essential to their existence. They were not simply tools for survival, they were part of building a life shaped by seasons, effort, and adaptability. After completing the tasks, checking the traps and gathering firewood, you return to the cabin. There is a sense of tiredness, but also quiet satisfaction. The cabin remains secure, the fire continues to burn, and the land has once again provided what was needed. The work is never truly finished, but you are prepared for what comes next. The legacy of the mountain men continues through this cabin, through your daily tasks, and through the way you live alongside the wilderness. They understood the importance of every moment, every action, and every detail that contributed to survival, and now, you understand it as well. The wilderness is vast, and the work is constant, but for tonight the cabin is warm, the fire steady, and you are safe. The storm may return, and the cold may press against the walls, but you are now part of this land, part of the legacy of those who came before you. Tomorrow you will continue the work just as they did, adapting, surviving, and moving forward. The fire has now burned lower, its soft glow casting long shadows across the cabin walls. Outside, the storm lingers, though it no longer feels as intense. Snow continues to gather in thick layers around the cabin, reminding you that the wilderness is always present, unpredictable and untamed. Inside, however, there is a sense of calm. The steady work of the past days has become part of you, and the rhythm of this life now feels natural, like the sound of wind moving through the trees. You think of the men who built this cabin, the mountain men who lived in isolation, creating a life in this harsh and unforgiving land. They too must have experienced this same quiet, after a day of work, sitting by the fire while storms raged outside. But within these walls, there is warmth, safety, and a sense of continuity that connects you to their legacy. Safety and a sense of achievement. The life they led involved constant effort and ongoing challenges, yet they found something meaningful in it. A strong connection to the land and to the act of survival itself. The cabin stands as a clear reflection of their resilience. Every piece of wood, every stone, and every carefully shaped corner reflects their skill and determination. The walls are sturdy, the roof is solid, and the hearth, though now quiet, has always represented their resistance against the cold. This was not only about constructing a shelter. It was about creating a place that could endure over time, a place where they could persist. And they succeeded. Their endurance came not only from physical strength but also from mental resilience, their ability to adjust to the constant demands of the wilderness. As you sit near the fire, you begin to realize how much of their spirit has become part of your own. The tasks that once felt endless, chopping firewood, checking traps, maintaining the cabin, are now part of your routine. They have become a natural rhythm of life. The solitude that once felt heavy now offers space to breathe, think, and gain clarity. The wilderness, with its balance of beauty and danger, has become a teacher. And like those who came before you, you have learned from it. The work is never truly finished. There is always firewood to gather, the cabin to maintain, and traps to check. The environment is constantly changing, requiring ongoing awareness. Yet there is peace in being prepared. The lessons passed down from those before you are now your own. They are reflected in every task you complete and every decision you make. The mountain men did not simply survive. They thrived by understanding the land, respecting its power, and adapting to its changes. You have also come to understand these principles. You have learned to work with the wilderness, surviving not only physically, but mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. Tomorrow, the responsibilities will continue. The cold will press against the cabin, the wind will rise, and survival will once again demand attention. But tonight you rest. The cabin is secure, the fire burns steadily, and you are safe. The storm outside feels distant. In this moment, you are not just surviving, you are truly living. The mountain men who built this cabin had limited resources, yet they had everything required to endure: resilience, resourcefulness, and a deep connection to the land. Now you carry those same qualities. You are part of their legacy, continuing the traditions they established. As the fire softly crackles and the night deepens, a quiet sense of satisfaction settles in. You have completed your work for the day, tending the land, maintaining the cabin, and keeping the fire alive. The wilderness may test you, but it will not defeat you. Tomorrow, you will rise as they once did, ready to face the day with strength and determination. For now, the cabin remains warm, the storm has passed, and peace surrounds you. The wind may return, and the cold may grow stronger, but tonight you are secure. And tomorrow, you will continue the work passed down through generations, the work of survival, resilience, and growth in the wilderness. The legacy of the mountain men lives on within you, becoming a deeper part of your identity with each passing day. The wind, once harsh and powerful, has softened into a gentle murmur. As morning arrives, the world outside your cabin reveals a stunning view. Clear skies stretch overhead, and sunlight casts long, soft shadows across the snow-covered ground. The storm has left behind a clean, untouched layer of snow that glows in the early light. The wilderness, once harsh and demanding, now appears calm and still, offering a brief moment of rest before the next challenge. The tasks of the day remain ahead, as they always do. Yet as you move through your morning routine, stoking the fire, gathering tools, and preparing for work, you reflect on your journey. The cabin, once unfamiliar, now feels like a natural extension of yourself. Every log, every beam, and every corner is deeply familiar, as if it belongs to you. Solitude, once overwhelming, has become a quiet companion. The ongoing cycle of survival, cutting wood, setting traps, maintaining the fire, now feels instinctive. It was not always this way. In the beginning, the wilderness felt like a constant struggle. The wind, the cold, and the isolation created daily challenges. But over time, you adapted. You learned to read the land, the way the wind shifts before a storm, and how animals behave as winter approaches. You developed respect for the environment, listened to it, and in return, it taught you how to survive. You have become part of this land, just like the mountain men who came before you. The fire crackles softly as you tend to it, its warmth pushing back the morning cold. Though simple, this task remains essential to your life here. Without the fire, the cabin would only be a shelter from the wind, and you would be exposed to the cold. The mountain men understood this well. They did not simply build shelters, they built lives, and the fire was central to that existence. It provided warmth, light, and a way to prepare food. It symbolized their ability to endure in a world that demanded much and offered little. As you collect firewood near the cabin, you pause and take in the silence. The snow stretches endlessly, untouched like a blank canvas. The cold is sharp but familiar. It is the same cold the mountain men endured. They lived with it, adapted to it, and responded to it rather than resisting it. They built their homes from the land, relying on skill, knowledge, and determination. Each day in the wilderness presents challenges, but also opportunities. Survival is not only about enduring hardship, it is about adapting and becoming part of the environment. The mountain men understood this deeply. They did more than build homes. They formed a relationship with the land. They worked with it, not against it, using what it provided to sustain their lives. In doing so, they learned to live because of the land, not just on it. Now, as you return to the cabin with firewood in hand, you feel that same connection. You understand the rhythms of this place. You have become part of its quiet flow. The cabin is your home, and like those before you, you have established your place in this untamed environment. Yet this journey is not only about survival. It is also about living, finding moments of peace and quiet satisfaction amid daily effort. The sun rises higher, and the world begins to awaken again after the storm. Despite its harshness, the wilderness holds beauty. Snow-covered trees shine in the sunlight, the air feels fresh, and the landscape stretches wide with possibility. The mountain men who built this cabin did more than survive. They lived in harmony with the land, carrying forward a way of life rooted in endurance and understanding. Respected and accepted, they became a part of it. Their cabins, much like yours, stand as symbols of endurance and the quiet strength required to live in such a demanding environment. As you sit by the fire later, your work completed for the day, you begin to realize that the legacy of the mountain is not only in the cabin itself or in the tasks carried out within it. It is reflected in how those before you adapted to their surroundings, finding strength not just through physical effort, but through understanding the land, moving with its rhythms, and living in harmony with it. You are now part of that same legacy, learning how to survive, adapt, and thrive in the wilderness. Tomorrow will bring new challenges as the work never truly ends. But for now, the fire burns steadily. The cabin remains warm, and the land outside rests in silence. The wilderness remains unchanged, yet you have changed. You have become part of it just as those before you once did. You have found a home here, and in the quiet peace that follows a day's labor, you understand that you have become truly connected to this land. The fire has started to fade, its last embers glowing gently in the hearth. As night settles in, the storm has passed, leaving behind a calm and untouched world. The snow outside glimmers faintly beneath the soft moonlight. The wilderness is quiet, peaceful, and filled with a sense of steady calm. The air remains cold and crisp, but inside the cabin, warmth endures. Within these walls, you are once again reminded of the effort required to make this place your home. As the fire's light disappears, you draw your blanket closer, its warmth shielding you from the evening cold. Outside lies a wild, cold, and beautiful landscape in quiet isolation. Inside, there exists a different kind of beauty, one shaped by effort, determination, and resilience of those who came before you. The mountain men who once lived here were men of action. They were always working, always progressing, always adjusting to the demands of the land. They did not simply survive, they lived with intention. Now, you too have learned to live with purpose, moving through each day with the same quiet strength they once carried. You reflect on the cabin, the work required to build and maintain it, the logs, the stones, the roof that protects from snow, and the fire that keeps the cold away. It was not only about survival, but about creating a space where one could truly live, even in a place that offered so little in return. Each log placed, each beam set, and every gap sealed represents the mountain men's commitment to survival. That same commitment now belongs to you. The work never truly ends. It is through that work, the chopping, gathering, and maintaining, that this cabin becomes a home. Those who lived here before understood that the land would never give anything freely. It required constant effort and attention. The wilderness cannot be controlled. It must be understood, respected, and worked with. They learned to live in harmony with the land, not as rulers, but as partners. It was not always easy, nor always comfortable, but it was a life they built through their own effort. Their legacy continues not just within these walls, but in how you live each day, the fire you maintain, the wood you cut, and the cabin you care for. All of it represents an ongoing story of resilience and survival. Tonight, as the wind moves gently through the trees and the fire slowly fades, you feel a connection to those who built this place. You share in their determination, resilience, and quiet strength. What once felt like isolation now feels like a space for reflection and peace, a place to rest after a day's work. It is easy to overlook the effort required to create this way of life, the time, labor, and persistence involved in building, maintaining, and adapting. But tonight, as you sit by the dying fire, you remember how far you have come. When you first arrived, the land was unfamiliar. Its cold, its isolation, and its demands were new to you. Now you understand it. You recognize its patterns, its challenges, and its rhythm. The wilderness remains wild and unforgiving, but you are no longer a stranger to it. You have learned how to live within it, how to work with it, and how to make it part of your life. Like the mountain men before you, you have learned that survival is not only about enduring hardship, but about finding meaning in each task and purpose in every day. Tomorrow, the work continues. There will be more wood to gather, more fires to tend, and more responsibilities to carry out. The wilderness will continue to test and challenge you, but you are prepared. You have learned from the land, just as those before you did, and with each passing day, you grow stronger in both body and mind. But for tonight, as the fire dims for the final time, you rest. The storm has passed. The night is still, and the wilderness stretches wide and silent. Inside, you are warm, safe, and at peace. The cabin stands firm, a quiet reminder of the labor, dedication, and spirit that brought it into being. Tomorrow will bring new challenges, but tonight is a well-earned moment of rest. You have earned this peace, this quiet, and the comfort of knowing you have made it through another day. While the world outside remains wild and untamed, within this cabin, you have found a place to breathe, reflect, and grow. As the last embers fade, you close your eyes, aware that the legacy of the mountain men continues through you. Tomorrow, you will rise again, ready to face whatever the wilderness brings. The night grows deeper, and the cabin rests in a calm stillness that mirrors the vast wilderness beyond. The fire is now only a faint glow. Its embers remain warm, holding onto the final traces of the day. Outside, the snow-covered land lies untouched, illuminated by moonlight, a scene unchanged, as if paused in time. There is a quiet peace in that stillness, a sense that the land exists beyond human presence, holding a history far older than any person who has ever walked it. Inside the cabin, the wind can still be heard softly moving through the cracks, though it no longer feels as harsh as before. The storm has passed, leaving only traces of its presence behind. Snow drifts gathered against the cabin resemble the aftermath of a battle overcome. You remain safe within these walls, surrounded by warmth and the essentials that sustain life. Even though the fire has nearly gone out, its warmth still lingers, a reminder of the effort required to keep it alive. You reflect again on the mountain men. They endured the same storms, the same isolation, and the same unending cycle of survival that you now understand well. He too understood what it was like to feel the wind moving strongly outside, to hear the quiet that follows after a storm, and to find comfort in the steady warmth of a fire tended with care and attention. The legacy of those men is not only in the cabin they built, but also in the lives they lived. Their quiet, unspoken resilience carried them through the hardships of the wilderness. As you lie down and pull your blanket closer, you experience a moment of calm. The work for the day is complete, and tomorrow will bring new challenges, new tasks, and new opportunities. For now you rest. The cabin is warm, the land outside is still, and the fire has settled into a quiet glow. The world beyond may feel vast and overwhelming, but within these walls, you are safe. Survival is not only about enduring cold, storms, or isolation. It is also about building a life despite them. The mountain men who built this cabin understood the wilderness clearly. They knew it was a place of constant change, where one could never fully relax or lower their guard. Yet they still built homes, created lives, and found ways to thrive. They used the land as a resource, adapted it to their needs, and made it their own. In that process, there was a quiet kind of beauty. Through the struggle to survive, they created something lasting, something that would remain long after they were gone. In this moment, you feel a connection to them. Not in a grand or emotional sense, but in the simple, everyday actions that define life. The work, the routine, and the steady passage of time in the wilderness. The mountain men did not have much, but they made full use of what they had. They understood that survival required both physical effort and mental strength. Living in the wilderness meant constant adaptation and the ability to move forward, regardless of difficulty. Now you are part of that same cycle. The wind may rise again, the snow may fall heavily, and the cold may return. But like those before you, you will continue. You will gather wood, maintain the fire, check the traps, and care for the cabin. This rhythm of survival continues, and over time, you become more connected to the land. You learn its patterns, its demands, and its rewards. In doing so, you build a life here. The wilderness remains wild, but it is no longer unfamiliar. Tomorrow, the work will begin again. The land will ask more of you, the cold will return, and the tasks will never fully stop. But for now, you are warm. The fire may have died down, but its warmth still remains in the room. The men who built this cabin would have known this feeling, the quiet peace that follows a day's work. The wilderness can never be fully controlled, but it can be understood, respected, and lived with. As you fall asleep, you know you have contributed to this ongoing cycle of survival. The storm has passed, the night is calm, and you are now part of the land, part of the cabin, and part of a continuing tradition of resilience. The night grows deeper, and you wake to soft morning light entering through the cabin window. The wind has returned to a gentle flow, and the snow-covered surroundings appear untouched, as if the land itself is resting. The fire is nearly out, yet its remaining embers still provide some warmth. The cabin feels safe and secure in an otherwise harsh environment. As you stretch and feel the effects of rest in your body, you pause to listen. The wilderness is quiet and expansive, broken only by the soft movement of snow or the slight creak of the cabin. This sense of peace has been earned through consistent effort over time. Every log chopped, every trap set, and every meal prepared has become part of your daily life here. The mountain men who lived here before understood the value of this stillness. They knew that within the challenges of the wilderness, there would be moments like this, moments of peace that come only through hard work, persistence, and understanding the land. You move carefully, feeling the cool air inside the cabin. The day's first tasks await, stoking the fire, checking the traps, and gathering more firewood. The cabin requires constant attention. The wind continues to push against it, and the cold looks for any way inside. But you are prepared. These tasks are now part of your routine. Like those before you, you understand that work is not just a goal. It is a necessary part of survival. It requires effort, awareness, and care. You quickly relight the fire, and its warmth begins to spread through the cabin. After gathering your tools, you step outside, and the cold immediately meets your skin. Though harsh, the cold is familiar. It is part of this land, and it carries its own quiet beauty. Snow crunches under your boots as you walk toward the traps. The surroundings remain silent, except for the faint movement of wind through the trees. There is a sense of calm in moving with purpose, knowing each action supports the life you have built. When you check the traps, they are empty again. This is expected. The wilderness does not give easily. It requires patience, consistency, and understanding of its cycles. The mountain men who came before you knew that not every effort would succeed. They accepted failure as part of progress and continued forward. As you continue your work, your breath visible in the cold air, the land feels both vast and familiar. Each element, the trees, the snow, the wind, becomes part of your daily experience. Over time, the wilderness becomes something you understand and live within. Returning to the cabin with firewood, you feel the weight of the day's tasks. The fire will remain steady, the cabin will stay warm, and the challenges of the wilderness will continue. You have learned, as those who came before you did, that survival is not only about resisting the land. It is about adjusting to it, living in harmony with it, and understanding that each day brings both a success and a lesson. You have come to respect the land, and in return, it has shown you how to endure within it. Back inside, the fire's warmth surrounds you, and you pause for a moment, taking everything in. The labor, the cold, the steady rhythm of life in the wilderness. These are all part of the story that the mountain men began. The cabin they constructed, the fire they maintained, and the land they worked with now live on through you. Tomorrow, the work will continue. The tasks will remain the same. Yet with each passing day, you grow more connected to this place, more immersed in the rhythm of survival. The wilderness is vast, but you have found your place within it. Like the mountain men before you, you are part of the land and its ongoing story of resilience, adaptation, and survival. The stillness of the cabin is striking in its quiet. The fire burns steadily now, its warmth filling the space with a calm presence. The day's tasks are complete. Firewood has been collected, the traps inspected, and the cabin maintained. Outside, the land remains untouched by human haste. Snow covers the world in a soft white silence, once again revealing the timeless beauty of the wilderness. Moonlight reflects off the snow, scattering it across the landscape like fine glitter, casting a gentle glow over everything. In moments like this, when the day's work is finished and the world outside rests, you feel a deep connection to the land. Sitting by the fire, the warmth settles into your body, and you allow the quiet of the night to surround you. The mountain men who lived here before would have experienced this same sense of peace. The peace that comes from knowing survival is ongoing, that challenges never fully end. Yet within each completed task lies a sense of satisfaction, a quiet relief, the understanding that no matter how difficult the wilderness becomes, you have the strength to face it. You have the fire for warmth, the cabin for shelter, and the land to sustain you. But it was not always this way. In the beginning, the first days and months, there must have been uncertainty and hardship. The wilderness was unfamiliar and harsh. The cold must have felt more intense, and the isolation more profound. Still, the mountain men did not turn away from the challenge. They faced it directly, day after day. They built their homes not just as protection from the elements, but as symbols of determination and resilience. Every log placed and every stone set was a reflection of their strong will. They understood that survival was not about escaping the wilderness, but about becoming part of it, adapting, and living alongside it. You are now living that same truth. The land has tested you as it tested them, yet you have endured. The work never ends, days filled with labor and storms that test your limits. But tonight, as you sit by the fire, you feel the weight of that effort. Every log chopped, every trap set, every meal prepared, every gap sealed in the cabin, it all represents your quiet victory. The mountain men built these cabins not only to survive, but to live. And now, as you sit here, you realize you are part of their legacy. The wilderness continues to shape you, teaching you the value of small victories and the peace earned through hard work. There are no shortcuts here. The land gives only what you earn from it. The mountain men understood this better than anyone. They did not seek comfort or ease. They sought survival. In doing so, they built meaningful lives, lives connected deeply to the land they called home. And through their work, they found purpose. As the fire fades and the embers glow softly in the hearth, your thoughts turn to tomorrow. The work will continue, just as it did for those before you. There will always be firewood to gather, tasks to complete, and storms to face. Yet within each moment lies a quiet sense of beauty. There is accomplishment in living in harmony with the land, in finding your place within it and shaping it into a home. The land may be wild and untamed, but within this cabin, in this life, you have made it yours. With that understanding, the weight of the day begins to lift. The work is demanding, but it is meaningful. You have learned to live with the land, to adapt, and to thrive. You are part of a story that has continued for generations, a story of resilience, survival, and quiet strength in the wilderness. The mountain men who built this place are gone, but their spirit remains in your work and in the way you endure. The night deepens as the fire settles into a soft glow. Outside, the world is still, the wilderness silent beneath the snow. The cabin stands strong, its walls firm and its hearth warm. You close your eyes, allowing the quiet to settle in, knowing that tomorrow will bring new challenges. But for tonight, there is peace. In this peace, you are reminded that you are part of something larger than yourself, a continuation of the enduring legacy of the mountain men. A legacy built on strength, survival, and resilience. As you drift into sleep, the world outside remains unchanged. Inside, the cabin offers its quiet promise. As long as you have the strength to endure, the land will continue to provide. And tomorrow, you will rise once again to meet it,